Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the District of Squamish Special Business Meeting for Tuesday, May 18th. We are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. It is Local Government Awareness Week and Public Works Week, and so several members of council, including myself, are wearing a collection of t-shirts from the last several years. Councillor Reyes, Councillor Pettengill, and myself. I can't tell you what year green was. I think purple was last year. But there's usually we host a whole bunch of kids at the Public Works Yard, and we can't do that this year because of COVID. So we still want to mark the occasion, and our staff have produced a whole bunch of great videos about what they do at Public Works. Those are on our website, and also there's a contest for elementary students on the website as well as part of the local government. Council, I'd like to amend the order of the agenda. Move item 9 to follow item 10. So I'd like to move that amended agenda if there's a second. Seconded by Councillor French. Does that make, just making sure everyone can see what I'm doing? So the staff report on the bylaw complaint policy amendment will follow the bylaw. That makes more sense. All right, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Because public health orders do not allow us to have in-person public attendance, you have to address Ministerial Order M192 that the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability by the following means. This meeting is being live streamed. A video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing and on an on-demand basis. And the meeting is open to the public for electronic participation via WebEx. Someone move that motion. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any opposed? Motion carries. We are meeting electronically, so just some ground rules. When council members connect or disconnect, they can let us know so that we can mark that in the minutes. When you wish to speak, if you're connected by video, you can just raise your hand. If you're on audio only, just say chair. With respect to a vote, council members are only required to state a nay vote, no statement required or in favor. Ask everyone to keep their phone, computer on mute unless it's their turn to speak. Council members are expected to be involved in the meeting, and if you're having technical difficulties, please text the corporate officer. And if we're having technical difficulties, we'll take recess for up to 10 minutes to get everyone. I know that Councillor Anderson is missing. Are we having, have we heard? All right, with that, Council, any no's motion? Seeing none. We do have a delegation this evening, and Mr. Brash is here. He's the Executive Director of the Truck Loggers Association. Good evening, Mr. Brash.
Oh, I was just fiddling around with the controls, trying to make them work. So my apologies.
Welcome, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. And I think my understanding is I have 5 minutes your agenda. So to Council and Mayor, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you. I know you've got lots on the go, so I'll get right into it. I think we just wanted to say hi from the Truck Loggers Association and maybe talk about some of the things we could possibly work on together. Some of you may know of our organization, some may not. We've been around for a long time, 78 years. We got about just under 500 members across the province, including many members within Squamish. We obviously work with the government on policies and regulations affecting the forest sector and trying to work towards improving the overall prosperity of the industry. And we've been a strong voice in the forest industry for a long time now, and we obviously work with a lot of folks in government, licensees, First Nations, safety authorities, and other associations, and we're quite heavily involved in forest education and scholarships. I think I'll skip right to the main point to talk about what we perceive some of the challenges in the forest industry these days. We're concerned about the overall investment climate in our forest sector. Some of you may know, especially if you go to Home Depot, the cost of lumber is at record levels these days, and that's a good thing for the industry. But we know that that's a cycle, and we know that things will get more back to normal at some time in the future, even though that's supposed to persist for a couple of years. So if you got any projects, all the indications are lumber is going to stay high for a little bit yet. But there you go. But what we want is more investment in the forest sector in British Columbia. And well, frankly, a lot of capital is not being invested in the forest sector in BC right now. And we'd like to sort of make sure government institutes policies to change that. We're concerned about the long-term certainty of the working forest land base. I'll talk about old growth in a bit. There's a concern about the overall cost structure in British Columbia and the complexity of the environment that we deal with. We basically have to be competitive with our global competitors. There is a need, and we trying our best, and we're trying to accelerate what we're doing in terms of consistent information about the forest sector. Obviously, lots of people have different opinions about a lot of different things these days, and there's lots of different facts out there. So we'd like to sort of assist in that to a greater extent. And most importantly, we want to work with everybody to sort of come up with a collective vision for the forest sector, which is something that's got to be done. We're awaiting some sort of significant documents from the provincial government in terms of what they're going to do with the old growth strategic review. And the premier has given a hint that they're looking at a new intentions document, which we perceive is going to talk about perhaps some tenure changes in the way tenure to allocate in British Columbia. Obviously, with old growth, that's a significant issue these days on the minds of many. There's a flood of data and a flood of opinions out there. I'm not going to get into that too much in this presentation, but what we also are concerned about is the lack of constructive dialogue and very polarized debate that's happening these days. Basically, who is talking to who these days. Harvesting is also not always a yes or no proposition. Our members are pretty innovative, and our logging sector is pretty innovative over the years, so we can do a lot of different things on the land base. We just all have to agree on what that different approach should be. Economic contributions of the forest sector remains highly significant. Probably every truckload that you see go by is $15,000 to $25,000 of GDP contribution to the province. So we support change. We're after government to sort of implement a broader vision that we can sort of all work towards. And I guess that comes to the main point of what we may be able to do with you folks. Obviously, we can give you lots of information about the forest sector, contributions, payrolls, employees. We can assist in public education, assist in, advocating for issues that we want to work on together. But most importantly, work on this collective vision for the forest sector moving forward so that our resource communities stay healthy. And I don't have the magic solution for how we would interact. A lot of that's going to be led by the provincial government and what they're going to institute for their consultative type processes. But I guess in the most simplistic way to describe it, our membership is very community based. We have lots of community members, about 20 community members. You're obviously a very important community member. So what we hope to do is once we sort of get some direction from the government is we hope to engage with you and other communities because we think there may be a lot of similarities in our approach towards moving the forest sector forward. So that's, I guess, the core of what I have to say to you folks today. I hope I stuck to my 5 minutes and thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you today. And of course, if there's any questions, I'd love to entertain them.
Thank you, Mr. Brash, and thank you for taking the time to join us this evening and just highlight some of those issues that we're facing in the province. And good to know that your organization is at the table and willing to be part of those issues. Council just asked if there's any quick questions for Mr. Brash. All right, thank you very much. I'm sure we'll be in touch over the coming months as we see parts of the fall.
I look forward to that opportunity, and thank you again for your time tonight.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
All right, we're on to item 6. This is consideration of unscheduled public attendance. So this is anyone who feels they have an emergent issue that cannot wait 2 weeks and wishes to address council. This would require you to raise your hand virtually over WebEx. You will have a minute to explain to council why you feel you should be speaking to council tonight. Council will then have a vote about whether to allow the unscheduled public attendance. You have a full agenda tonight. There are 2 hands up. All right, so I'll go to our moderator. Lee, you can go ahead, please, Leo Callahan.
Okay.
You've got a minute to tell council why you feel it's important to speak tonight.
All right. My name's Leo Callahan. I live in Valleycliff, and I'm against Bylaw 2829/2021. I have 498 signatures on a petition to stop this bylaw. I would like to speak about the bylaw and how it will impact Valleycliff. I would like to speak about the wording of the bylaw and how these words will have an impact. And finally, I would like to explain why I am against this bylaw and if we could not get it adopted today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Callahan. So council, someone has put a motion on the floor, whether or not to hear. And where in the agenda? Councilor Everett?
I move that we hear from, we let him speak prior to discussion of the bylaw. So I just refer to the agenda here. I'd leave it to the chair to figure out appropriate spot, but prior to D on our agenda.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Pettengill. Any other comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. So stay with us, Mr. Callahan, and we'll figure out where on the agenda that you'll be given your 5 minutes. Next, Kim and Graham. Good evening.
Hello.
So you've got a minute to explain to council why you feel it's important for you to speak tonight, and then council will vote.
Thank you. So we just wanted to comment briefly on the proposed camping bylaw as well. My name is Kim and this is Graham, and we are Squamish residents who live in downtown. My comments, we believe that local and traveling vehicle dwellers are an integral part of the Squamish community, and we're concerned that the camping bylaw is not inclusive to many folks who work and contribute to this community, and it also sets a dangerous precedent for who is welcome to call Squamish home. There are many examples of successful solutions that include band dwellers, and we would like.
Kim,
Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there. This
Sure.
is the time to explain your position. It's just to let council know what you wish to speak to.
Okay, this is, sorry, I haven't done this before. Thank you. This is what I would wish to speak to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, council, so someone will need to move that. Councilor Stoner, you're moving that? And where do you wish to?
I'll move that they be given 5 minutes to speak before item D on our agenda.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any further comments? Councilor Pettengill?
Just wanted to mention the reason I put my hands up is there has been a lot of public interest in the topic. I think both speakers were referring to different aspects of it, and I think we have been challenged by COVID, recognizing this is not a public hearing. You know, I am trying to balance that against the challenges we've had engaging at times with COVID, and so I'm comfortable allowing the last 2 speakers, which is why I have supported the last one and this one. Thank you.
Councilor French? Did I see your hand?
I was planning to second, so that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, so we will hear those items after item D on the agenda, which used to be item 10D, but now it's 9D. Okay, so we will move on in our agenda. First up is item 9A, first and second reading, District of Squamish Official Community Plan Bylaw Amendment Bylaw for the Oceanfront number 2796, 2021. And I believe staff will be doing a presentation on the OCP amendments, the zoning bylaw amendments, and the phase development agreement amendments, and then we'll vote on those separately. And so I see that Ms. Fletcher has joined us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Just bear with me while I share my screen. All right. And you're able to see my presentation? Excellent. Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Jessie Fletcher, a planner here with the District of Squamish. And tonight I'm here to present 3 bylaws for consideration of first and second reading. These bylaws encompass changes to the Oceanfront Phase Development Agreement, zoning bylaw, and sub-area plan. These amendments are the result of the proposed expansion of district-owned roads throughout the oceanfront. These changes were first introduced to Council in March of 2021 at a Committee of the Whole meeting. Today's presentation will summarize key changes and also address Council comments from the previous meeting. While the Oceanfront Peninsula has a long history, this slide briefly covers the background related to the application. So the Oceanfront underwent a sub-area planning process which occurred over a long time frame and included extensive public consultation. It was completed in 2010. The land was rezoned to the Comprehensive Development 69 zone as the sale of the land to the developer was occurring, along with the negotiation and adoption of the phase development agreement. The first DP was issued in 2016 and then amended to permit a second DP for the carbon engineering development in 2020. This is currently under construction. In 2018, a narrow suite of amendments was given third reading by Council but was not adopted. Those changes have been integrated into these amendments. And to help contextualize where we are in the oceanfront development, we are officially in phase 1 of the oceanfront build-out, which includes this rezoning, a forthcoming development permit for a presentation center and restaurant, the beginning of construction on the oceanfront park, and a forthcoming rezoning that looks to bring in some land that is included in the sub-area plan, but was not zoned CD 69 or captured in the phase development agreement. This rezoning that's forthcoming, which will be called the BCR rezoning, will also require revisiting the PDA a second time this year as the applicant seeks to review parking holistically on the oceanfront, which triggers a zoning amendment, which triggers another PDA amendment. Phase 1 is expected to include applications for a few additional DPs for office and residential. Barring any unexpected delays, this phase is expected to run until mid-2023. So getting back to the application, this application is made of 3 principal sections, the zoning bylaw, the official community plan bylaw, and the phase development agreement amendments. It's within the OCP that the oceanfront sub-area plan lives. This slide shows which category each of the changes falls within. Tonight we'll discuss each category and address Council comments from the previous meeting. The trigger for this housekeeping amendment, as previously mentioned, was the increased dedication of roads to the district. Previously, only the main road, which is the road outlined in red on the slide, was to be district-owned or public. The yellow roads on this map represent an increase of 942 meters of district roads, specifically a road through the village and roads through blocks B, C, and E. The dedication of these roads is accompanied by new cross-sections that ensure that these spaces meet best practices in terms of active transportation accommodation, sidewalks, and landscaping. There are 3 primary benefits to public roads, the first being minimum standards. So strata roads only need to meet minimum standards for fire access, and all road standards would be negotiated at each development permit. By making these major roads public ensures that they are constructed with substantial room for bicycle travel, pedestrians, and landscaping. The second is maintenance. So public roads will benefit from regular district-led maintenance, whereby strata roads are maintained by a strata to a variable degree. And finally, public access. By designating these additional roads as public guarantees public access. Strata roads could designate when and how roads are accessed and restrict activities customary on public roads, reducing the public benefits considerably. So the first amending bylaw that we will cover is the zoning bylaw. Several changes are proposed to the CD69 zone. These changes are to offset the gross floor area or parking that is lost from the dedication of private land to public roads, to facilitate construction with mass timber, to align setbacks with new road cross-sections and planning best practices, and to define commercial space. At the previous meeting, questions were asked regarding opportunities to benchmark parking standards against similar developments and regarding the future plans for Block C. So staff reviewed these issues or these comments with the applicant, and it was determined that these issues were outside of the scope of these amendments. The applicant again has submitted a second rezoning application for lands outside of the CD69 zone, but within the Oceanfront sub-area plan, and these items will be reviewed and addressed as part of that application. So this is the primary change that has been made to the zone from the previous one council reviewed. At the previous meeting, staff discussed removing the commercial cap within the CD69 zone, which is set at 27,666 square meters. It should be noted that the sub-area plan allows for different amounts of commercial use at different maximums, and that's largely because the sub-area plan area is much larger than the area encompassed in the CD69 zone. Staff worked with the applicant to review this comment. The original intention of removing the commercial cap was to ensure that there would be no limit on office space, as it was not clear that office was not included or excluded in the definition of commercial. In the zoning bylaw, commercial is defined as a category of use providing for an occupation, employment, or enterprise that is carried on for gain or monetary profit by any person. To reduce the uncertainty of this definition, staff proposed defining commercial within the CD69 zone as ground floor service-oriented and retaining the cap on commercial use in the zoning. Staff also proposed removing the cap on employment within the sub-area plan, which is discussed later in this presentation. The next bylaw we're reviewing are the PDA amendments. Bylaw 2812 seeks to amend the phased development agreement. Changes to this agreement include a requirement that 80% of all residential gross floor area or units use 100% renewable sources of energy. This commitment is significant as it exceeds the new floor area ratio density bonus standards of the zoning bylaw. Those provisions allow for apartment buildings to utilize gas for water heating. A commitment to accommodate some on-street parking in the village until the end of the agreement, updating the required infrastructure to reference new road cross sections, replacing the zoning bylaw in the phased development agreement with the March 2018 consolidated version. That version includes, amongst other things, updated electric vehicle charging requirements and an updated definition. Staff note that electric vehicle charging infrastructure was not included in this update and will be explored during the next update. Updates to Schedule F, the subdivision and development control bylaw, that includes updated lighting road cross sections, intersection designs, lighting guidelines, and tree guidelines. And finally, replacing Schedule I, the floodproofing covenant, to update the flood construction levels as established by the Coastal Flood Hazard Assessment report that is included in your report this evening, and appending that report to the phased development agreement. This new report aligns with the recommendations in the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. Council asked that staff document temporary parking conditions in the village and consider phasing it out over the life of the phased development agreement. Provide more detail regarding how the space will feel accessible for pedestrians. The developer has provided an additional rendering of the village streets to represent what the road cross-section will look like when realized as shown on the screen, to help explain how pedestrians will experience the public realm with and without parking. I've shown the parking and post-parking condition on the screen. A material change will indicate the transition from slowed or self-propelled portion of the road to the vehicle portion of the road. Bollards will be movable to allow stalls to be removed for events or at an earlier date with minimal effort. The Village Street cross-section has been updated to note that parking within Block A will be removed by 2035. The PDA agreement was updated to state that up to 50% of all on-street parking stalls may be removed by 2031. Staff had initially proposed that a commitment to some degree of street activation be included in the PDA to replace the parking at the end of the agreement. This is no longer proposed because the agreement would be challenging to enforce and potentially undesirable if the village develops to the original vision. Bollards will be easily movable, making parking easy to remove at any point. The vision for the village is a lively, active area, and the removed parking ideally will be used as patio extensions for restaurants in the area. Council also requested that staff review proposed tree planting guidelines with evolving urban forest guidelines. Staff compared these guidelines outlined in both the road cross sections and tree plan against the guidelines from City of Vancouver, City of North Vancouver, District of North Vancouver, and the City of Kelowna, amongst other places. Tree spacing by species on public roads was determined to be consistent with other municipalities. Soil volumes, watering protocols, spacing from intersections, building canopies, and other utilities were all set to ensure that a maximum number of trees in the public realm could be planted while also protecting for their long-term health. Staff did not identify any large gaps between our recommended standards and those set forth by the above-noted municipalities. Another question from council was about whether or not there was room to introduce more one-way roads. Staff reviewed the road configuration with the fire department, and the fire department maintained that it is imperative for their response times to maintain district roads as two ways in this location. Staff will continue to discuss the possibility of one-way roads on strata roads moving forward. The final amending bylaw, bylaw number 2796, seeks to make amendments to the Oceanfront sub-area plan, which is Appendix N of the OCP. The first change is to remove the employment cap, GFA, in section 7.6.1.2.2. This does not increase the permitted commercial use and institutional use gross floor areas. It should be noted that this change would include land that is currently not zoned CD69 but is captured within the sub-area plan. This amending bylaw also proposes to update the floor area ratios and heights where applicable in Schedule I. The primary changes to height reflect the 2018 changes, while the changes to floor area ratio reflect the adjustment to lot size following the dedication of public roads. Some additional comments from the last meeting include a clarification about provisions for public art. Staff note that within the phase development agreement, there are 3 public art contributions of a value of a total of at least $150,000 collectively to be delivered before commercial occupancy on lots 6, 7, and 8. There was a comment about considering covered spaces in public places. Those policies do exist within the sub-area plan regarding providing covered outdoor spaces in the public realm and will be designed and secured as part of each development permit. There was a comment about requirement for canopies, and again, there are existing policies and DP guidelines within the sub-area plan regarding providing canopies for weather protection. And finally, there were comments regarding alignment with the Community Climate Action Plan. And staff do note that the sub-area plan does have policies regarding energy use and GHG reduction, and that the SAP does allow for council to consider any zoning changes that are inconsistent with the SAP if the ground for these inconsistencies is for climate adaptation. So to inform the community per policy, this application was posted on the district's development showcase and 2 development signs were posted on the site. Staff received 1 comment with a public information meeting request. The comment noted that it was difficult to understand what was happening. Staff offered more information and more opportunities for conversation and launched a public information meeting that ran for a month in March for the Oceanfront to help provide a more thorough explanation of what changes were proposed. Because of the nature of the application, it felt necessary to provide additional forms for information for the public. Staff received 1 phone call during this time, and the caller assumed that the setbacks included a reduced setback to the catamaran, but staff clarified that that's not occurring, that the setbacks from the water are maintained. So staff recommend that council consider first and second reading of the Oceanfront OCP amendment and schedule a public hearing for June 8th, and then again the same recommendation for bylaw number 2797, that's to the zoning bylaw, and to the phase development agreement bylaw number 2387, or sorry, 2812, be given first and second reading, and that a public hearing be scheduled for June 8th. Thank you, and that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Fletcher. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Pena.
Yeah, thanks. I've got a few. Just wondering if staff can explain. I was confused about front, rear, and side setbacks, and sort of intuitively, I would expect the front side setbacks to be anywhere where there's a municipal road, but I'm not sure if that's actually what we're thinking about here, and so I'd like to understand where these different setbacks apply.
Through the mayor, so setbacks are defined within our zoning bylaw, the front, side, interior, and exterior side. And so it is from property line. So your property line could be against a strata road or a public road or another property. And so in terms of the front lot line, for example, if you were fronting two public roads, it would be the narrower of the two lot lines. The unique part of the oceanfront zoning is they don't differentiate between side and interior or exterior side setbacks, so the same setback would apply there. It is defined within the zoning bylaw.
And sorry, if I may then, so that means in some of those blocks where it's surrounded completely by a municipal road, that sort of road facing side would all be front setback on all four sides?
Through the mayor, so there's only one front setback for any lot, and that would be the narrowest of the lot lines fronting a public road, and that's defined in the zoning bylaw.
Okay. Okay, I have to think about that. Yeah, just intuitively, it looks sort of to me like the road's the same on all four sides, and so that's why I was struggling. But okay, you mentioned that there'd be at a future update some opportunity to dig into the EV charging infrastructure, and then also at a future point in time, climate action related policies could be required despite the current zoning. I'm just wondering if you can explain a bit. And actually, I also had a question about accessible parking. So just understanding our the points in time when we can look at these things or address them.
Through the mayor, so just to summarize, you have questions about when to apply accessible parking standards, EV charging infrastructure, and more climate change policy?
Yes.
Okay, great. So through the mayor, in terms of if we wanted to revisit accessible parking, our ratios and or electric vehicle charging infrastructure, we do have another update coming in the fall, and at that update, we're revisiting parking on the oceanfront as a whole. At that point, it would be appropriate to review those with the applicant and request changes there. It was chosen not to be done during this update in terms of just not a scope creep. As you can see, there are quite a few amendments that are happening, and so we needed to keep it to a certain scope. In terms of climate change policies, and I apologize if this wasn't clear, the district climate change policies don't necessarily not apply to the oceanfront. They can be reviewed as development permits come forward and as new proposals come forward. The Sudbury plan also does have some strong climate change policy that can be used in concert when reviewing things moving forward. If council had more desire to see more climate change initiatives, we will be reviewing that at the next rezoning as well, and that should be coming forward in the fall.
Okay, I'll stand down on that. I did have some concerns there. Mayor, I do have a couple more questions, but I can stand down if there's other people that would like to ask.
Keep going.
Okay, thank you. I noticed that we are proposing to close consultation, including with Squamish Nation, and I just wanted to check with all the work on reconciliation and so on that we're touching base with Squamish Nation and making sure that everyone's comfortable with that at this point.
Through the mayor, consultation with Squamish Nation is done by using their process. They have a process that they wish us to use, and we've been following that process as guided by them.
Okay, thank you. Just seeing if I had. Oh, so one of the other things a lot of the discussion has talked about compensating the developer with some extra density and so on, given the expanded streets and the how that has taken away developable space. But you know, there's presumably significant benefit to the developer because there's much nicer streets at our expense. And I'm just wondering if staff could comment on how that was factored into the balance in terms of what sort of new density we should grant.
Through the mayor, so just to clarify, there's no any additional density offsets lost density. So the increase from, for example, I believe the village, it goes from 1.0 to 1.2. The gross floor area that is achievable has not changed. So they're not gaining additional density per se. They're allowed to build the same thing on a smaller parcel, if that makes more sense.
Right. Okay. So we've adjusted through the setbacks essentially.
Yeah. So we have done
Okay.
the math through the mayor, and so the resulting gross floor area on each parcel remains the same after the dedication of public roads.
Okay. I will stand down for now. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Stoner?
Just curious how we came to the amount or why we're limiting the ability to reduce the parking in the village to only 50% by 2031. If there's opportunity to go beyond that, why wouldn't we?
Through the mayor, it was an amount that the developer had requested. At 2031, we don't expect there to be a lot of activity down there. It'll still be under development a bit, so it felt like a fair number at that point in time. If council directed staff to review that, we would need to take this back to the applicant and discuss with them. The number of parking stalls in the village that could be achieved are estimated between 50 and 60 overall, so it's not a huge number to begin with, so it appeared reasonable.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. And then I'm just trying to pull up attachment 3. I was a little bit confused about where the traffic lane was for non-motorized vehicles, so active transportation lane. And I'm just wondering if staff could pull that up and clarify for the village area if there is an active transportation lane, or if that is if there'll just be bikes on the road there.
Jesse, would you like me to take that?
Oh, hello, Dave. Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Dave Merrow, Director of Major Projects. Through the Mayor, Councillor Stoner, the village area is intended to be not have defined bike lanes or pedestrian sidewalk areas. It's supposed to be a sort of intermingling experience for both pedestrians and bicyclists. Less of a thoroughfare, more of a sort of destination type area. So there's no defined bike paths. It would sort of give an ample space for pedestrians and bicyclists to commingle.
But just to clarify, the long-term vision post 2035 is that there's no vehicles in that area. So this is just a transition phase, that there'd be that commingling.
Through the mayor, that is correct. It would be a transitional phase. In the long run, there is to be no parking in the village with the exception of 5 stalls, I believe, in front of the presentation center.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Pettingham?
Yeah, thanks. Just I'm wondering if staff can comment with the changes to commercial and the definitions. Um, do we have a sense of what the proportion of retail to office is likely to be? And I know we haven't defined it specifically that way, but did we have an objective in mind with that or a thought?
Through the mayor, that is a bit of a tough question to answer in that, like, so the gross floor area for commercial doesn't explicitly say whether that includes office or not in the summary plan or in the zoning. By defining commercial in the zoning, we're capping the retail at that amount, but there's no cap on the the employment space beyond that commercial. The summary plan plans for a lot more of that employment, so light industrial or office or artisan uses outside of that commercial. In terms of the actual proportion, I would have to refer you back to the sub area plan and those amounts that were shown earlier. What the actual build out will end up looking like, I don't have an answer for you.
Okay, thank you. And then the other thing I just wanted to, and I'm getting a bit prickly, I guess, on the details, but with the 80% renewable energy, is that 80% of the units by unit count or gross floor area must be 100% renewable, and then the other 20% can be whatever mix they want, or, and that's how I read it, or does it mean that at the site as a whole, as long as 80% of the energy is renewable, we're good?
Through the mayor, your first interpretation there, 80% of the units will need to use 100% renewable energy, whereas 20% could employ gas to use, for example, hot water heating.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks.
Ms. Fletcher, I was going to ask, in area B, we're talking about 3-story buildings, but then we also allow 70% of lot coverage. So is there still an option if we wanted to create more public realm or some amenities for that employment area to be taller?
Sorry,
Or
did you say area B?
Yeah, the heights are all prescribed in that appendix at the back. It sort of shows, you know, B is 3 stories, the hotel is 6, there's a few 12-story buildings. But is there some flexibility in that just to give us the flexibility to look after the public realm as we put up buildings? Because 70 and 80% lot coverage is a lot, versus adding a few floors and making the building taller and skinnier and allowing for some public realm in the employment area.
Through the mayor, the height is something that could be varied at development permit, absolutely. The suburban plan does allow for flexibility when considering things like that at development permit. So
thank you. I couldn't remember that. Any other questions? All right. I just want to ask the corporate officer, the enactment clauses for designated public hearings, some are for WebEx, some they all have slightly different wording. Does that matter, or do you care on the dates there?
It could, does it say electronic meeting on WebEx?
Some of them do, some of them don't mention WebEx.
As long as it says electronic public hearing, those are the important, and the date and the time. So the place, the date and the time, electronic public hearing, June 8th, 6 p.m.
Seeing no other hands, council, there's, we have to deal with each of these separately. The first up is the OCP bylaw, amendment bylaw number 2796/2021, which goes through the consultation pieces and then sets the electronic public hearing for June 8th. Someone that'd like to move that? By Councillor Stoner, second by Councillor Race. Any comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? That carries. The second one is amendment bylaw for Oceanfront housekeeping amendments number 2797/2021. This is to give first and second reading and set the Any comments on this? Thank you.
Yeah, I will be supporting this, and I was trying to pick which one I would sort of make my comments at. Just have a few. Uh, I I don't know enough about setbacks to sort of comment about what they should or shouldn't be, or to know that these ones aren't appropriate. But intuitively, I'm sort of expecting or envisioning from everything you've read that there's this sort of same level of activity on all these sort of main municipal streets. And that's kind of why we're taking this project on, to make sure they're all really active, vibrant, and so on. So the idea that some of these might be considered side areas and so on gives me a bit of a pause. And so something maybe for staff to think about as we see more densification, these sorts of developments, does it make sense to have to think about setbacks in this way for this kind of development? Um, I do have a bit of concern about office to retail ratios, just thinking about affordability of the people who are working there, where are they going to live, and is there a match? Because we know housing affordability is a challenge. And the other thing is, and it's a general concern, but I notice again, we seem to be doing some excellent things on emissions with residential development, but there's nothing in terms of commercial and industrial. And I think we really need to start paying attention to that much sooner rather than later. And I know that, again, is broad. That's our approach everywhere at the moment. But I think we do have opportunities here. And so maybe in September, when we get the next phase of updates, that's something to think about. But I think that's a gap that we should be looking to fill. But having said that, I think there's a lot of positive things here, and so I will be supporting these. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
I take it that the conversation regarding exploring one-way roads that is occurring with the fire department will be continuing. I also note the attention to truck radiuses and truck traffic and needed to accommodate that, and I'm pleased with this. There is a reference to, I'll cite the reference to visitor parking stalls being located on strata roads being counted towards the required parking. On that matter, the example is given of Eagle Wind. I think we should be cautious on this topic. It will be a learning experience and with evaluation as we go, because Eagle Wind, I don't think can be recognized as a success story to date, at least, regarding parking. So this is going to be something we're going to learn from. Thirdly, I'm pleased to see under the fostering economic development section in policy alignment that the height bonus has been added since our last conversation. The implication of this, of course, is the incentivizing of mass timber construction. Mass timber has been around for 30 years, but there is a strongly growing interest in its potential applications, and there are numerous international news feeds on this topic, and now Squamish and this development will be a part of those news feeds. This is important for our economic development programs because there's manufacturing interests tying into that news feeds, and we have an opportunity here to showcase mass timber in a unique scale, in interesting seismic circumstances, always of interest to building engineers. And also we should keep in mind that we're all around the world looking at our carbon footprint in buildings, and this is more than just operational emissions. So this will also be watched, and including, of course, by ourselves. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Race.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Pettengill got me going and made me think about speaking once for the three of them, and so I think this will be for all three. But I am supporting these. We did discuss this quite thoroughly, I thought, at the committee of the whole, and went through a lot of these things in much more detail. So, but generally, I am satisfied with these, and I think it makes what is a good development even better as we go forward. Some of these points I think will add to the public benefit, the developer benefit, and the user benefit for this development. I can recall going to a talk one time by an architect planner who was speaking about the marathon development along the waterfront in Vancouver, and said they spent a lot of time zoning it, and then in the course of construction went through about 11 rezonings or zoning amendments. This is, I think, the second, if I recall, for this one. I can expect that there will be more as this development evolves and as our community evolves around it. And I think it's something we should look forward to, creates opportunities to keep the development current with our municipal standards. The other point, though, is that the mayor, I think, made an interesting point about the public realm. It doesn't show in the report for this agenda, but I've seen other diagrams of the significant amount of park space that will be included in the development, which is just not described here. But nevertheless, you know, there might be opportunities as we go forward, and I think we should always be careful to look at those for possibly doing exactly what the mayor thought, which is basically shrink the footprint and still provide the same amount of floor space for the developer. And if nothing else, it sometimes provides variation, and that alone sometimes is an appeal. So I think we should consider those opportunities down there. Public realm, I think, will be very important. Walking space. I know there's a very comprehensive trail network for this development, which also doesn't show up in these drawings. But I think this development will evolve, and it's something that council and following councils will have to pay attention to, just to keep it current with our relevant standards. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to support first two readings. I think these amendments don't change the spirit of what we're trying to achieve, which is the original vision of a third park, a third employment, and a third residential. And I think that, for me, it's always about making the changes that make the development better without taking away from the I think that these do that, and also help us accomplish some of the things that we'd like to see in our in-time action plan. And also furthers the discussion on parking, walkable areas, and giving over some of the public realm to people, cyclists rather than cars eventually. So I look forward to the public hearing on the 8th. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question on the zoning bylaw number 2797. Any opposed? Motion carries. Now the District of Squamish Phase Development Agreement Amendment Bylaw 28/12/2020. Moved by Council Pettengill, seconded by Councilor Grace. Pettengill?
It's actually, I'm fine to move it, but you're cutting in and out, Mayor Elliott. At times, it's challenging to hear you a little bit.
Thank you for letting me know. Does that help a little bit? Okay. All right, so we have that first, that moved and seconded. Are there any comments on the phase development agreement? All right, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. So we're on to 9B, second reading. This is District of Squamish zoning bylaw. Thank you, Ms. Fletcher, for joining us. District of Squamish zoning bylaw, amendment bylaw for the marine zones, number 2771/2020. Ms. McJanet will be joining us.
Good evening, Council. It's Sarah McJanet here. I am just waiting for the opportunity to share my screen.
That is coming your way.
Great, and I can't see Council as I'm sharing my screen, so just maybe a verbal confirmation that you can see my presentation and hear me okay. I'll try that again. Apologies. Perfect. And so just a confirmation that council can see my presentation and hear me okay.
We can hear you and we can see your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So good evening, Mayor and Council, community of Squamish. My name is Sarah McJanet, community planner, and also on deck with me tonight is Megan Light, our environmental coordinator, RP Bio, and in-house marine spatial planner. Tonight, we are here to present inputs from the intergovernmental referrals on marine zoning amendment bylaw 2771, following first reading of the bylaw on March 16th. As well as additional stakeholder comments that were received through the 45-day additional public comment period that ended on May 3rd. Bylaw revisions and additional options are presented as part of second reading for Council's consideration tonight. To recap, we are in the final project stages and now in the formal bylaw approvals process. So we've had multiple council workshops in the bylaw drafting stage that provided key direction on the marine zones and regulations, and they have been tweaked as needed to respond to council, intergovernmental, and community inputs. Ongoing engagement and communications have continued through COVID. Upon first reading in March, all prior focus group and marine stakeholder contacts were contacted by email with links to the updated project page where continued comments could be provided. We posted to social media and placed an ad in the April 29th edition of the Chief, advertising that the public comment period was closing May 3rd. Telephone calls and meetings were held with government contacts and additional forestry sector knowledge and leaseholders, as well as upland owners. And so this is all detailed in the ongoing engagement log for this project. So subject to second reading of the bylaw, the next step for us is to schedule and host the statutory public hearing. For any new public tuning in, the 5 new proposed marine-specific M1 to M5 zones are shown on the slide here. Plus, the district has also proposed to apply an existing conservation zone P4 to several marine focus areas for enhanced ecological protection. Bylaw 2771 also sets out a set of marine definitions and general regulations that apply to all marine uses and areas, unless otherwise specified in the bylaw. For clarity and as a reminder, Bylaw 2771 also includes an updated consolidated Schedule A to the zoning bylaw for the whole municipality. And this consolidated map series that includes the new marine zones also has some map updates for municipal, crown and provincial, and a number of private parcels. So these include previously adopted zoning amendments, approved alignment of zoning boundaries with legal parcel cadaster, housekeeping amendments, correction of map errors, and alignment of district and crown land zoning, such as in parks with our community plan designations and policies. So staff initiated intergovernmental outreach with Project Startup way back in 2019, in late 2019, and we've continued through the process. So in March, following first reading, we referred the bylaw and the maps to the Squamish Nation, federal, provincial, and regional governments, and we also published the project, the updated information to the webpage for the 45-day comment period that ended May 3rd. In attachment 2, we've presented a summary of all the comments received, as well as proposed bylaw revisions that have been made in response to council identified items on March 16th and the additional governmental and stakeholder inputs. We've also received additional comment from several members of the public from the Sea to Sky Forestry Center, Squamish Chamber of Commerce, Tourism Squamish, Wood Fiber, LNG, and BCTS, the BC Timber Supply. So I do have a couple highlight slides to touch on the specific inputs of the nation, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, the province, BCTS, as well as from those additional stakeholders I just mentioned. So inputs on marine zoning from Squamish Nation focused on archaeological site protection. So our discussion with Squamish Nation Rights and Title highlighted the importance of affirming archaeological site potential, as there are many unrecorded sites in coastal marine areas. And bigger picture archaeological considerations in land and marine use planning are key to avoid impacts to cultural and heritage sites, including archaeological and traditional use sites and important cultural places. The nation requested a full shoreline archaeological overview assessment and field review as part of this rezoning. So we had further discussion around this. Staff did reference provincial archaeological data, and the registry was reviewed for known sites in proximity to marine areas. However, conducting a full shoreline archaeological overview assessment of the municipality and field review was out of scope for the marine zoning bylaw update. We note here that archaeological sites are protected under the Heritage Conservation Act. Zoning itself does not authorize site development, but we are through development review for works that authorize site development or modification. We are flagging potential sites as well as high potential areas. And this is also being flagged through project referrals and the provincial tenure process. We haven't made any changes to the marine zoning at second reading, but we have offered some additional recommendations outside of the zoning project for future District of Squamish policy, marine archaeological overview assessment that can help support ongoing and future joint planning with the nation, as well as strengthen municipal or operational guidelines for archaeological resource protection. From the Ministry of Transportation and Highway, those inputs are detailed in the package. We took another look at the ministerial order area for the Darrell Bay Ferry Terminal facility, which is designated for ferry terminal use only. Council's direction on March 16th to review the intent statement for the M5 zone as to public use and marine public use for marine transportation services. So that was reviewed and discussed. We note that the intent statement and description of uses in the zoning focus on uses and not users. And so by design, they have been silent on sort of the public versus private entity use of the ferry terminal or marine transportation services. Right now, under the ministerial order, the ferry terminal is not considered a public access facility by the province. In future, where the facility or the site is opened up for transportation service, if it's granted to a third party for use, the M5 zone intent statement and the definition as written would allow for the ferry terminal or marine transportation service use, whether public or private. Ultimately, though, Darrell Bay is under provincial control through the MO. We haven't made any changes to the M5 intent statement or uses proposed for second reading. The ministry has no concerns with the proposed zones for Darrell Bay at this time, nor on the bylaw as a whole. They have provided preliminary approval for the bylaw as required under the Transportation Act, and subject to third reading, it would go back to them for final approval. In April, the district received formal requests from BC Timber Supply to consider pre-zoning of a northern log dump site on the west side of Howe Sound. This is northeast of Woodfibre. This is a pre-existing dump site that was decommissioned in the 90s, and it's identified to provide access to tidewater for the Mill Creek and Woodfibre core operating area as part of BCTS's 5-year operating plan. This area is currently proposed for M1 Marine General Zoning in Bylaw 2771. And the M1 zone is the overall zone that we've applied to marine areas outside of existing designated commercial, recreational, industrial, or conservation zones or comprehensive development zones. The site conditions, as we've noted, this is a previously used dump site. It's situated in a small bay at the outlet of a watercourse with a mixed boulder cobble foreshore in an identified herring spawning area. BCTS would like the district to pre-zone the marine site to M4 to forego a future step of having to amend the marine zoning and avoiding time and cost to do so. The province has urged the district to align zoning with provincial forestry plans, given the importance of tidewater access for this area, as well as the provincial economy, timber supply and pricing, and the forest sector strategy for BC. There is some complexity here in the zoning for the uses across the upland and the water, and I'll detail these momentarily, which has created some challenge in trying to address these based on preliminary plans outside of a site-specific zoning and development review. Before outlining the zoning process options and alternatives that staff have outlined in the report, we wanted to offer some key points and joint planning considerations. We have noted, based on the letters and the engagement, that there is an essential need for tidewater access to support harvest areas on the west side of Howe Sound, and all parties do acknowledge there will be a log dump provided in this area. However, we wanted to highlight, in contrast to the other long-standing log storage tenure areas that are proposed as M4 in this marine zoning bylaw, the northern dump site has not received formal Crown tenure for the water lot. It hasn't been subject to intergovernmental referrals or review, nor federal environmental review through that process. And so applications are actually forthcoming this summer. Pre-zoning the marine water lot and the upland would be based on plans that haven't gone through that review or approval process yet, and would not be aligned with an actual legal tenure boundary or surveyed water lot. So the pre-zoning staff note consigns all the siting and setback considerations to that provincial federal review process. And another final concern and consideration that we've raised is that, as you'll see on the next slide, the M4 zone is also not a perfect fit for this location necessarily. There is a 100-meter setback condition of use that isn't accommodated in the original plans that have been presented by BC Timber Supply. So there's some reconciliation that needs to happen there. The current zoning proposal and recommendation to zone the entire sort of west side outside of the wood fiber industrial area to the M1 Marine General Zone. Firstly, that is the recommended process approach coming from staff, and that's subsequent to the project going through the intergovernmental review, that we would then look to process site-specific zoning and project review in concert with that process. And so this allows for joint review on specific siting of a log transfer facility and an opportunity to play an active role. This is a busy slide. There's lots going on here, but this outlines the 3 process options that are noted concerning the northern log dump. So as noted in option 1 in the red colored box, the main recommended motion is to maintain the M1 zone currently set out in Bylaw 2771. This would require future site-specific rezoning based on a defined and approved water tenure area pursuant to the senior government approvals and tenure process. The second option, which is the alternate motion B in the staff report, and is the preference for BC Timber Supply, is for the district to pre-zone this northern log dump site to M1 log storage in alignment with the provincial operating plan. As noted, this is still an imperfect zoning solution as the conditions of use with the 100-meter offset of log handling and storage areas from water courses and important fish habitat areas. So there's still some misalignment there unless BC Timber Supply is able in the end to adjust the facility to accommodate the prescribed buffer. The third option, alternate motion A at the bottom of the slide, is to go back to the current state and zoning for this area in our existing zoning bylaw, which is the resource zone for the site. This would require a map amendment to the current bylaw 2771 that's at first reading. The resource zone that we have within our zoning bylaw permits forestry but excludes log sort operations, as well as industrial uses like barging, loading facilities, and the other large loading facilities and industrial uses are zoned differently under I3 or I5 log sort zoning for other sites such as Site B, Squamish Terminals, Watts Point, and for the log sorting operations in the Mount Quembline Channel. As you can see, the third option will also require future zoning alignment, kind of regardless. Finally, the column on the far right highlights for clarity that in addition to municipal zoning, the district's 2018 official community plan bylaw pursuant to the Local Government Act includes a development permit area requirement for environmental areas prior to land alterations in identified environmentally sensitive review areas. So we have now in place terrestrial and aquatic development guidelines that would apply to the upland, foreshore, and marine development proposed as part of this site. So more detailed assessment of this site and due diligence is and has been outside the current scope of the marine bylaw review. And typically, as a last point of note, typically for new industrial use applications, we would be considering through site-specific zoning application. Finally, additional stakeholder inputs were received from the Sea to Sky Forestry Center, the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Squamish on the importance of the marine gateway, water access, and recreational connectivity in the Upper Mount Quembline Channel. As we've noted in past presentations, the Upper Mount Quembline Channel area has a high sensitivity rating with important habitat values as part of the overall estuary. So there's salt marsh, subtidal mudflats, riparian foreshore, and also it's an area where off-site habitat enhancement has been occurring for other projects within the Mount Quembline Channel. In addition to ecological values, there are long-established recreational and trail interests for this area. As outlined in past plans, the Mount Quembline Channel Sub-Area Plan, the Upper Mount Quembline Channel Study, Land Use Plan and Policy, as well as our Parks and Rec Master Plan. And there's also currently a revitalization strategy, as you know, that's underway for the Adventure Center and future park planning identified for Rose Park. Through the marine zoning engagement process, we did a lot of engagement with stewardship stakeholders through focus groups last October, who noted that a careful balancing act is really required for this area, given concern for impact of recreational activities on environmentally sensitive areas as well. And so there was recognition that further assessment is needed. Bylaw 2771 proposes split zoning for crown water lots in the Blind Channel. So P4 is applied to the northern portion, north of the future bridge access for the Red Bridge project. And M1, which allows community water access, is focused in the southern part of the Upper Mount Quembline Channel, where the water levels are deeper. We know also the P4 zone does not permit docks or boat launch infrastructure, but I just wanted to also clarify for council and community that marine navigation is permitted in all marine zones, including the P4. So water-based navigation in and of itself, like actively traveling in, on, or through the water, is permitted in all marine zones, as well as the P4, including these upper reaches, but practically is only possible at higher tides, of course. I would just say there's no proposed changes to the Upper Mount Quembline Channel zoning at second reading at this time. We can make future zoning refinements following additional study and detailed planning for environmental enhancements, water access, and dredging review. Just two more slides, just to highlight that for second reading, 2 amendments are proposed tonight. A minor text amendment to the marine fuel sales definition to replace the term gasoline with liquid fuel so that it's technically correct for a marine context, of course, boats using diesel. The definition is inclusive of both liquid fuel as well as alternative fuel service for hybrid or electric vessel propulsion systems. The bylaw does not include a mandatory requirement for fast charging systems at this time, based on the outcome of the council deliberation on March 16th, where it was discussed with limited space for marine fuel docks, charging times and high turnover for vessels. Electric charging as part of a marine fuel sales dock is impractical, and instead the focus is being placed on charging infrastructures in marinas with shore power connectivity, which is a requirement under the M2 zone. Second, there's a map amendment for second reading proposed tonight, which includes adjusting the P4 boundary in the Cattermole Slough on the west side of the Squamish oceanfront. So you can see in the image that the P4 boundary would terminate and align with the southern boundary of the adjacent H1 Cattermole Natural Marine Subzone within the CD69 zone. I have a better photo on the next slide just to show you. So that is to say that there's that small M1 Marine General dog leg, as noted by council last time, that has been revised, recognizing the navigation open water area adjacent to the west pocket berth of Squamish terminals. The east berth, I'm sorry, and at the head of the peninsula. So here's another image that just shows that P4 M1 zoning adjustment in the context of the CD69 oceanfront zoning blocks. We've had continued consultation with Matthews West around the west side of the waterfront and these C and C1 employment blocks. They are not deemed to be frustrated by the P4 zoning that's being proposed through the marine zoning bylaw. And the uplands are fronted by the H1 natural Cattermole marine subzone, which is very complementary on the other side of the slough. So in summary, staff are recommending second reading of District of Squamish zoning bylaw amendment bylaw 2771 as amended and on the council agenda tonight, and that subject to second reading that the district schedule an electronic public hearing for June 8th. Coincidentally, as it happens, June 8th is World Oceans Day. I didn't plan it that way, but that's awesome. Next steps will be for statutory notification through the chief newspaper advertising and through all our online and social media channels, including creation of a public hearing report package for public inspection. There are, as you know, in the council report, a number of alternative council motions based on the inputs and requests received. So most alternate motion A is to revise and give second reading to bylaw 2771 to capture any additional text or map amendments that council would like to see. Motion B is to revise and give second reading to bylaw 2771 with a specific direction to revise Schedule A map sheet 6 to pre-zone the BCTS Northern log dump site to M4 in anticipation of a future log dump site reactivation. And there is a draft map as attachment 3 in the council report to this effect. Motion C is where deemed necessary to bring bylaw 2771 back to a committee meeting to workshop further revisions, and where additional research, refinement, and engagement are directed, the project timeline will need to be extended. So this concludes staff's presentation. We welcome questions and direction of council to confirm next steps with the marine zoning bylaw. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you. Council, questions? Councilor Pettingill and then Councilor Anderson.
Yes, thank you. I saw in the report some references to the Upper Mamcombe Blind Channel and concern about the P4 zoning, but in that context also reference to dredging and different discussion about whether a rezoning or reconsideration might happen, should happen, will happen. I'm just wondering if staff can talk to whether we have any definite or immediate plans around dredging and then further zoning reconsiderations, or just what the plans are or aren't there?
Thank you so much for this, for that question, Councillor Pettingill. In that Upper Mamquam Blind Channel area, there has been a lot of discussion and review, and there's a lot of current planning also that's coming together, both with the Adventure Center revitalization project, with the acquisition of the foreshore and the JD's lands, and park expansion, also through the Parks and Rec master plan and our DCC project list. There is an identified item for Rose Park planning, and then of course through our marine action strategy ongoing implementation for following the marine zoning. One of the implementation tasks is to initiate a marine water access review to get tactical about marine water access. And then also in the budget this year, of course, is the ecosystem-based dredge management strategy and funding strategy. So we have been also, we have begun scoping for dredging and the geographical extent of dredging. So all these things together will be quite informative going forward. We have looked back to past environmental review and studies, stormwater management plans, hydrological studies. There's a lot of information also that came in through the Red Bridge project as well, and of course there's a future bridge amenity that's planned there. So we're trying to triangulate all those things. There is opportunity absolutely to reassess the P4 M1 split zoning that's proposed currently in the future, based on more detailed review that is needed and will come. The other thing to point out is that the district does own a lot of the foreshore now within that Upper Mamquam Blind Channel. So for us to consider a suitable place for community water access as the upland owner, essentially, we have a good opportunity to assess that in concert with the community and with our local environmental groups and recreation interests in Smoke Bluffs Park community.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Anderson?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to begin with the M4 log storage zoning provisions. And I suppose I have a comment, but it leads to a big, well, then what? And I suppose that's the question I'll be putting. Now, there are two guidebooks. One is the approved work practices for reactivated log dumps, and this is a multi-agency production in 2011. The other one is the Department of Fisheries Notions from 2003, and it's more general. Now, the former, the 2011 publication, appears to be the one that's been consulted for the provisions for the M4 log storage zone. However, it does not address log storage. Its focus is log dumps. Log dumps can potentially have a much greater environmental impact, and there's more sensitivity in where they might be located. For example, next to water courses, there's more debris that comes out of a dumping situation than log storage. There's also more of a need for fresh water in the case of log storage. But in summary, they have very different recommendations. And regarding log storage, the 2003 publication does not require 100 meters from water courses for log storage, and it does not require the same depth. I can go into just off the top of my head. Depth required 12 meters versus 20 meters. 20 meters for log dumps, 12 meters for log storage. So what this means is, and I take it you're familiar that there are these two reports, but only one is cited. And the more stringent numbers regarding distance and depth of water are cited in our zoning bylaw. This has, or proposed, this has major implications on the east side of Northern Howe Sound. We have 4 water courses, log storage adjacent or right on top of the outflows of these water courses. We have one zone or one water lot that might be, well, put into question nearer to Watts Point because it's entirely adjacent to beach. So this has a lot of implications, and so with that there are these two guidebooks, and the one that has been consulted is for log dumps, not log storage. It occurs to me that we maybe need to go back and have a second look or engage in further consultation, not least with people like Council of Forest Industries, who's involved with both of them, and Department of Fisheries and Oceans, because of the implications. The other implications of the guidebook chosen and the provisions in the M4 log storage zone is that we're going to apply it potentially under option 2 over on West Howe Sound. And so really, I'll just stop there, Ms. McJanet, is if you have anything to offer as to where we are now, because we have not consulted the DFO guidebook in putting together these provisions, and this leads to some uncertainty and some clumsiness in how they're going to be applied on both sides of Howe Sound.
Thank you so much, Councillor Anderson, for those questions and comments, and I'll do my best to answer to the best of my ability, and then also Megan Light can give a wave if she'd like to add anything if I have missed important details. So in terms of development of the siting considerations for the M4 zone, both the approved work practices, but also the 2003 DFO and guidebook for environmentally sensitive log handling facilities in BC were informative to the creation of the siting considerations as proposed, and were part of our engagement and discussion with forest sector representatives. The 2003 DFO guidebook does speak to facility siting for log handling sites. And as you note, there's lots of different kind of components and different attributes of different sites, especially if we're talking about sort of transient log storage versus sites that are active log handling. And I just want to note for clarity also, active log handling, water-based log handling does include and references provincial kind of policy and definition around log storage, booming, dumping, sorting, and barging. So those are all kind of included. The DFO guidebook, facility siting best management practices, speaks to avoiding sensitive habitat. So talking about log dumps, healthy log dumps and booming areas shall generally be situated at least 100 meters from the mouth of fish-bearing streams, and that facilities should not be developed in areas known to be important spawning or rearing habitat for fish, important fish, salmonoids, herring, eulakin, shellfish. So we have incorporated and referenced both the DFO guidebook as well as the approved work practices for informing that setback consideration and condition of use. Also on the condition around the depth for just one second, the depth for log storage, 12 meters deep versus 20 meters deep for dumps. We did review and talk about the difference, recognizing, of course, that greater depths are important for higher impact log dumping activities. But we went with the 20 meters deep at chart datum for log storage, so that there's no question around tidal grounding, and also in recognition of protection for other types of environmental values, such as kelp forests. So I will also just shout out over to Megan if there's anything that she would like to add as our staff environment coordinator. If you have anything, Megan.
Yeah, just a quick note on the guidebook from April 2003 from DFO. So it does kind of directly point to just the site facility siting, which speaks directly to log handling, what Sarah just gave for the definition of all those activities. So sites for in-water storage or transfer of logs should be located at least 100 meters from wetland, deltas, rivers, creek mouths, and other critical habitats. So that was just a key point that was looked at for this.
Thank you.
I have to suggest that this is becoming confusing because I'm looking at it right now, and the 100 meters is explicitly for log dumps, helicopter log dumps, and booming areas under section 5.0. We can go into detail here, but I think this is a very serious confusion that needs to be sorted out for a number of stakeholders. There's much at stake here, and I'm not satisfied that we have our provisions lined up or that proper consultation has taken place. And I've heard this from industry people as well. They're not satisfied that, well, they haven't had time, in fact. I believe that what we need to do next is to talk with COFI. They are the people with staff resources that the local small companies don't have to address this. So the other, I just bring up one more point with respect to these provisions is as they might apply under option 2 across the water. Because the provisions as proposed under M4 log storage address log sort, but BCTS is not proposing, BC Timber Sales is not proposing a log sort as they've spelled out in their correspondence. So there's another element of the clumsiness of application of the proposed M4 provisions over on that side. It raises some questions as to option 2 that even they are proposing. But so I am not satisfied with the clarity of where we're going with these provisions for M4, because that's not what the 2003 guidebook points to for log storage, and the introduction of the log sorting element in the provision for the M4 log storage makes it clumsy for across the water. And really, is it necessary? Another element I'll just mention here, in our earlier OCPs, there was reference to water-based log sorting. That is an archaic term. It comes from before dryland log sorting. So some of an additional confusion arises when we use that phrasing, which isn't how industry works today and hasn't for decades. In summary, I am concerned about the provisions of the M4 log storage as proposed. I'll leave it there for now. I'll have some additional comments on the BCTS situation perhaps as we come later. Thank you.
Other questions? Councilor Stoner.
Thank you, through the chair. Just have a quick question around the location of off-street parking facilities as it relates to marinas in particular, so section 41.2. And we discussed this, I think, a little bit in committee, Ms. McJanet, where it references Schedule D as an allowable place that is perhaps not directly adjacent, but that with certain conditions, off-street parking could be allowed through the area identified on Schedule D. I'm just curious why we're still constraining that to the area in Schedule D, knowing that that's already an area that's like quite overwhelmed with parking, and not considering a bit of a broader area for that allowance. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Councillor Stoner, for the question. I'm just going back to my notes from first reading, because the mapping that we provided and reviewed that currently exists within the zoning bylaw for Schedule D, previously I think we had a like a numeric distance from a marina that, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been 400 meters or so. I just want to go back and just fact check that in my notes. But when we actually overlaid that 400 meters within the downtown area, it did it did overlap fairly well with that Schedule D already. It didn't cover off some of the furthest reaches for the downtown up against the estuary, but for the majority of the kind of the commercial parcels and whatnot, there was good coverage there. So to keep things simple in the bylaw, we just sort of stuck with that existing Schedule D. And I'll just call to Jonas in case there's anything he wants to add there, but that's from first reading.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mr. Vilniskis, did you want to add something?
Thank you, Mayor. The only thing I would add is that that sort of provision is something that council could vary if a proposal came forward with a greater distance. So it wouldn't be a rezoning; it could be done as part of a development permit.
Thank you for that clarity. Any other questions? Dear Glenda?
Here, Elliot, I'm wondering if it would be all right if staff could recess our caucus for 10 minutes, if council would be okay with 10 minutes recess.
Well, we've been sitting for 90 minutes, so I'm okay with that. Just let me see if there's any other questions before we go. Any other questions on this bylaw before we go? Councilor Anderson?
Yes, I have a number of comments, but I'll just maybe turn to the Upper Mamquam channel and pose.
We're still at questions, Councilor Anderson.
Yes, I am, and I'll be posing a general question of why we would be proceeding with the zoning there, the proposed P4 zoning, when there are so many planning processes in play, and the potential that this is extra effort. There are no development pressures. In fact, the only development pressure in that area is the rock climbers building trails, and with it, which has been a substantial activity. But there are no pressures here, so why not defer so that we can allow these planning processes to come into clear, that is, let the smoke clear a little bit. So I wonder if staff can just offer as to why we do need to proceed at this time with P4 zoning there, with all of these concerns and planning processes in conversation.
Thank you for that question. In response, the current zoning of the Crown water lots in that Upper Mamquam blind channel and those upper reaches is industrial. And because this is an area that does have high environmental values and sensitivity, through the marine zoning update, staff's recommendation to zone and move the dial closer to in better alignment to an ultimate zone fit for the area, I think is a worthwhile consideration. Even if the split zoning is not perfect at this time, it does basically highlight the ecological values there. It removes this former industrial zoning. There are, with the exception of Rose Park, the municipal lands on the east side and Red Bridge, there is another private lot, upland lot in the Mamquam Plain or in those upper reaches. And we just want to be cautious and recognize that even if there's additional planning to come, there's always going to be additional planning, but I think we're just trying to move progressively towards a better fit zoning away from the industrial zone that exists there now. That was the recommendation.
Well, I cannot see why, again, with the light industrial zoning has been there for a long time, and the 1993 and the 1997 planning processes made the observation that new zoning is inevitable. The light industrial zone lands are owned by the district and by private landowner, and by I bet the mountain club's lands might be coming to that designation too. And there's another piece of crown land that the district is applying for. So I see absolutely no risk of the light industrial zone being exercised by any of these owners. It's been around a long time. The vision is clear. not least from the 2012 land use plan and policy statement from the district. So again, I just don't see the urgency. It just adds more clutter and confusion, perhaps obscures goals going forward with the ongoing planning processes. Thank you.
Any other questions before we recess? All right, seeing none, we will come back at 7:55. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you very much for indulging us on that recess, not only to clarify some information, but also just to stretch our legs and refresh our glasses. So I do want to go back to staff because Councillor Anderson raised some questions that may have created some confusion. And staff have had an opportunity to go back and look at their references. And so I will turn it over to Ms. McJannet.
Thank you so much, Mayor Elliott. I do have a slide to share, so I'm just going to share my screen, if I may. Just one moment. All right, so this is actually an excerpt from the 2003 DFO guidebook on environmentally sustainable log handling facilities. And so I just wanted to highlight, this is the reference that has also been informing staff in the development of the M4 log storage zone. You can see under section 5.1, it talks to careful evaluation of potential log handling sites and notes in yellow the highlights. Sites for in-water storage or transfer of logs should be located in available areas with the least productive intertidal and subtidal habitat, and generally should be situated at least 100 meters from wetlands, deltas, river and creek mouths, and other critical and important habitat. So I've just highlighted some of those best management practices, S1, 2, 3, and then at the bottom, there's also further best management practices related to sensitive habitat for water depths as well. And as Councillor Anderson pointed out, this DFO guideline talks to 12 meters for most log storage sites and 20 meters for heli log drops and associated temporary storage facilities. So I just wanted to point out that, point to the actual reference that we have been looking at. The forest sector representatives that we spoke to actually pointed us to these guidelines or this guidebook, as well as we were talking about industry best practices that are being employed within the forest sector in BC. So I will stop sharing that screen now, and then I'll turn it back over to Council.
Thank you, Ms. McJannet. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I have the same page in front of me. Note the difference between S2, where it refers to log dumps, helicopter log dumps, and booming areas. Now, a booming area is not a log storage area. Those are different types of activities. And the preamble, which you've highlighted above it under the facility citing in the slide you've shown. Now that's, I'll just draw attention, there's a difference there. The recommendations are in the S series. And the other thing about this manual is it talks about trade-offs. It talks, for example, about favoring sites that are already used and already compromised. And this type of discussion is found in that preamble. I can't explain the discrepancy between those two, but it has significant implications, the import we give to it. This guidebook should have been cited in the report as no biggie, but we have it in front of us now. But the key thing to look at is the S2. That is the summary recommendations, and it's explicit that 100 meters does not include log storage. Now we're going to have to work this through, whatever we do, on that eastern shore. And on that eastern shore, as I've mentioned, we have 4 creeks coming down in the middle of those log storage areas. There's significant implications to following the preamble versus S2. And it's going to be site specific. but I suggest that this needs more work and evaluation. And I apologize. I should have brought forward the idea of engagement because I have been making suggestions to staff and trying to rally people. But the forest industry people here locally are busy. We've caught them in a very active part of the year. And it's best probably, in hindsight, I might have passed this on earlier, is to go to dedicated staff people at the Council of Forest Industries that have been involved in this. I'll leave it at that for now. I'm still unsatisfied with how we are interpreting and implementing the recommendations in here. I would prefer to see that we stick to the S series of the actual recommendation statements there rather than the preamble. A lot of implications.
Ms. McJanet, I have a question. Usually when we change zoning, people are grandfathered for their current use. So it doesn't impact the current log storage areas, changing to M4?
Thank you for that question, Mayor Elliott. As we highlighted, I believe at first reading, with the existing longstanding log tenures that exist in Howe Sound within the municipal jurisdiction area, these prescribed zoning conditions for the M1 will apply to new applications and new uses and new siting. So we've previously clarified that they would not apply kind of retroactively to existing, but it is our hope to work very closely with the forest sector and the industry around progressively looking at the siting and looking for ways to address some of these best management practices in a joint, more joint planning. So for new licenses, new renewals for log storage, this is the opportunity before us to work together. And we recognize that there's a balance that's required with forestry access. We know that the forest sector it has an interest also in ecological values and that to minimize cumulative impacts as well. So I think there's a lot of good work ahead in working closely with the forest sector here.
Thank you. Any other questions on the marine zoning bylaw? Not seeing any hands. We have an opportunity to give second reading and set a public hearing date. If that is the will of council. Councilor Race? You're moving that. Seconded by Councilor Stoner. Are there comments? Go ahead, Councilor Race.
Thank you. I beg your pardon?
Councilor Race and Councilor Stoner.
Okay. Thank you. This is second reading, and I'm happy to move it at this stage to keep it going through the process. Generally, I've been supportive of this bylaw going through the process, but the two things I wanted to speak to specifically were with respect to the Upper Blind Channel and with the northern, it's labeled the northern log sort, the proposed northern log sort on the west side of the sound. So with respect to the log sort, I think at this stage it is appropriate that we leave the bylaw as is and we don't pre-zone. Pre-zoning to me, when they haven't completed any of the other approvals, surveyed the site or anything like that, is premature at this point. And so I think it would be more appropriate if that site does wish to go ahead as a log sort in the future, that be a site-specific zoning with those other approvals in place. And as far as the Upper Blind Channel goes, I'm for the moment content with the proposed demarcation between M1 and P4. There is some infrastructure proposed, the bridge, and also some watercraft handling docks and so forth for kayaking and canoeing, stand-up paddleboarding. But those are, I'm going by memory now, pretty much at the southern end and related to the Red Bridge proposal. So not necessary at the upper end of the Blind Channel. I tend to agree with staff. I mean, if there is a landowner up there that's zoned industrial and there's a water lot in front of it zoned industrial, that can be a bit of a risk. And we've seen that before in other parts of the municipality where there's historic zoning that catches us. So I'm quite happy to change that now. And if there is a proposal that comes along later, we can consider it later after this zoning, but I would rather see it rezoned at this point. So I'll be supporting this going to second reading and public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Race. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm happy to support the motion on the floor and second reading for the marine zoning bylaw amendments. I think that this process has been extensive and ongoing, and I'd like to commend Ms. McJanet for the clarity of the presentation as well as the number of referrals and feedback received and how we've managed to handle all of that. This is a complex issue. And I think that this gets us way further than we have been, and that we haven't had marine zones. So we know we're not going to get it perfect this time. I'm happy to move this to public hearing and continue to hear from the public if there's specific feedback. But at this time, I'm content with where the bylaw is sitting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson and Councillor Pettengill.
Thank you. There's been a lot of hard work taking place behind the scenes, and I'm familiar with some of the engagement activity that's taken place on all fronts of this zoning bylaw. It's a complex picture. Staff have been nimble in several areas and instances. The above the Highway 99 bridge, there's been some reconsideration there upon consultation with stakeholders. There's been some changes to the One-Acre Park and into the Cattermole Slough. This is a very welcome ability to respond and be nimble on the part of our staff. I, however, will not be supporting this recommendation. I would prefer to see a deferral for the Upper Mamcomb Channel for reasons I've already given, and for the M4 log storage due to confusion about the provisions of that zoning in the proposed zoning bylaw. And I would prefer to see a deferral for the BCTS Northern Log Dump site to have it then retain its resource zoning status. For each of these three cases, I do not see any urgency. And in the case of the BCTS Northern Log Dump, I just see that the other two options are have problematic aspects. Turning to the M4 log storage, Mayor Elliott has raised the issue of grandfathering, but this for the stakeholders can be some uncertainty. There are references to how the vision for how this might be considered in future, but we have to realize that industry has nowhere to go. Most of the log storage area in the Northern Howe Sound has gone to other uses or designations. And it's very limited areas where they can have fresh water to store logs. Fresh water important so that they're not affected by teredo worms. So this must be kept in mind ongoing. There is concern and uncertainty, and this will need to be addressed in any case. Finally, with respect to the again the BCTS log dump sort, there is reference to Ocean Watch. I happen to be one of the authors of the Ocean Watch, a couple of chapters I had some input into, and I would not recommend that the Ocean Watch reports be used for advising planning. What is in the Ocean Watch that we should be careful to watch, to monitor and to implement are the action items. But a lot of the descriptions in there need work. This is because the Ocean Watch is relying on a stakeholder network that is still evolving. And there's some passages in there that are not as well informed as they need to be. And this is specifically with respect to herring spawning areas. Nexon Beach is a herring spawning area. The Yacht Club is a herring spawning area. Herring spawn under the highway bridge, although not with great survival. The big herring spawning factory is underneath the East Dock and Squamish terminals. So the consultant that wrote the report for the BCTS in February 2016, Douglas Swanson, happens to be the professional biologist advising the herring recovery program in Howe Sound for Squamish streamkeepers. And he's that the marine habitat and diversity is not considered sensitive or critical at the site of the proposed log storage. Alternative site locations needn't be recommended. So that's an expert on herring spawning. I'll leave it at that then. Is that, yes, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettengill, and then Councillor Herford, and then Councillor French.
Yeah, thanks. First, I just want to flag, after we vote on this, I would like to test another resolution based on a staff invitation in the report. And in terms of this, I just want to touch on a couple things that I proposed and didn't get support on last time. And in terms of Darrell Bay, I'm still concerned with some of the correspondence we've been getting in relation to the spit, but other topics, that public access to the water is still a very high concern. And, I understand the ministerial order and so on, but I would still have liked to have seen us push a little further with the ministry in some sort of public accommodation, even if it's just public ferry, as opposed to wide open public access. I think that is really important with a lot of these access points and Darrell Bay in particular. But I'm not going to try that again or test that again today. And then related, I got some blowback online after my suggestion that we require an electric charger. I just wanted to note, when I dug down into it, most of the concern was that it wasn't needed today and no one would use it today. And I just wanted to clarify that that is not my thinking or intention or reason for proposing this at all. The technology is changing so incredibly quickly. I had acknowledgement that it wouldn't be that hard to put it in, so it's not at all an insurmountable thing. And when I look at the marine industrial zones that we have on the oceanfront and so on, I just see this as such an opportunity, a very small, zero cost thing for us that really, I think, puts us in a leadership position. And so I sort of regret that we're not taking that opportunity, even if it's somewhat symbolic at this point. And so, having said that, I do really appreciate a lot of the other things that are in this. There is a lot of important changes here and a lot of good work. So I'm still a little bit on the fence because those two issues are quite important to me. For tonight, I'm going to support it, and I may waffle back the other way after the public hearing. So we'll see. But for tonight, with those comments, I will be supporting this.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I've been impressed with staff's work on this file, the engagement and consultation and referrals. The list is extensive, and it's been great to see the plan evolve over time. So I'll be supporting this at this point. Looking forward to hearing what our public has to say about it at the public hearing. So thank you, staff, for all the work, and I'll be happy to support.
Councillor French? You're on mute.
Mayor Elliott, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. So I too am ready to hear community feedback on this issue. The work done by district staff on this file is impressive and appreciated. And this marine zoning work is long overdue. It's definitely time to move this forward as our waterfront evolves. And I hear Councillor Anderson's concerns. And while it is long overdue, I appreciate Councillor Anderson's knowledge and feedback. And I do support second reading and setting a public hearing date. And then with the upper blind channel issue, I'll be listening to the public for thoughts on this issue of park recreation zoning or conservation for the top end of the Malcolm Blind Channel. So I'll be supporting the motion in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm supporting the staff recommendation. I haven't seen any showstoppers at this point. I think the zones so far send us in the right direction. I think the P4 zoning in the Upper Mountain Line Channel aligns with the primary values for that area. And after we do more planning, there's always the opportunity to shift that mix a little bit if we need to with the M1 zone. So that's not a concern to me. I think we need to do that access planning with the community before we make that call, but I think this is a better alignment. So I look forward to hearing from the public in addition to all the submissions we've already received in this file. Thanks for your work on this stuff. I will call the question. Any opposed? Councillor Anderson opposes. Motion carries. Thank you very much. Councillor Pettingill.
Yes, just in the staff report, there was comment that with direction, and I took it as an invitation from staff that we might consider or direct staff to consider some of Squamish Nation's archaeological concerns as part of the 2022 budget process. So I wanted to test a resolution that staff propose an approach for addressing Squamish Nation archaeological concerns as part of the 2022 budget process.
You're seconding that, Councillor Anderson, or do you have a comment? You're on mute.
Are you open to comments at this time, Mayor Elliott?
We need to
I'm
put a
sorry,
motion on the floor.
I'm
I'm
sorry,
asking you, were you seconding that or were you speaking?
My apologies, I was on mute. I'll be seconding the motion and I'll comment on this as well.
Okay. Councillor Pettingill, are you speaking to your motion?
Yeah, just again, I'm following up with what I took as an invitation from staff to do this. I don't want to prescribe at this point what that approach should be. I don't have the details, but it sounded like it was a discussion that staff and my interpretation that staff and the nation were interested in having. So without prejudging what this is, I think it's something that we should discuss at budget time.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. It is my understanding that it is already staff's intention to propose this exercise. I gather that from some of the staff reporting that's taken place recently. And I look forward to this. I think it's an important step. However, just in relation to a comment that Councillor Pettingill has made, I'd just like to remind that it is not because of the Squamish Nation's interests or concerns that we are undertaking this. It is the law. The habitat, excuse me, I won't, I'm flying off the top of my head. I'm not going to cite the right legislation, but it is an expectation on all of us. It doesn't matter whether the Squamish Nation is interested or not, and of course they are, but it is an expectation on all of us that we do be mindful of archaeological sites. Within the marine realm, archaeological sites have been uncovered by district staff laying water pipe. That's the history. And it's good that we may go forward to have more of a better mapping information as to where we can anticipate this. And there are indeed a couple of sites within the realm of the zoning that we are talking about here that are well known to the community because, well, it happens that they are uncovered and discovered, and we have known areas that we should become more familiar with. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll just say my preference would have been to refer this to committee of the whole. It's a new topic that we haven't discussed before, and I think saving it for budget doesn't give it the space it needs. I'd rather understand the scope and what would be involved before and provide staff some direction before it goes to budget. So I won't be supporting this motion. Race.
Yeah, thank you. I don't like to see it directly go to budget either, and I would prefer to see it go to committee of the whole to at least get a scope, a bit of a scope idea of what this might entail. So I will propose that as an amendment, that it be referred to committee of the whole.
I'll second the amendment. Comments on the amendment?
Can I just accept that as a friendly amendment?
We're gonna amend it.
Okay.
Any other comments on the amendment? I'll call the question on the amendment. Any opposed? Motion carries. On the main motion as amended, which is the committee of the whole. Any further comments? On the question, any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Ms. Light, Ms. McDonough, thank you very much. Okay, we're on to item C, which is the Squamish floodplain management bylaw number 2751, 2020.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Yep, my presentation. Can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is David Rolston. I'm the Manager of Municipal Infrastructure with the District of Squamish. Here today with the objective to receive the first 3 readings for floodplain bylaw 2751/2021, which would, and we're seeking to repeal and replace the existing bylaw.
Mr. Ralston, can you get closer to your mic or speak up a bit? We're just a little bit faint.
Yeah, can you hear me a little better now?
Better.
Okay. The first floodplain bylaw was adopted in 2017 as a key recommendation in the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan. And it has been amended once before, just to address some initial challenges that staff were having with the bylaw. The floodplain bylaw fits into our overall flood policy framework as shown here. The Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan is the overall guiding document, and it recommended policy that was incorporated into the official community plan. So that laid out broad goals and objectives, as well as our land use policy, and also introduced a new development permit area that regulates development within floodways and debris flow areas. The floodplain bylaw regulates building construction within the floodplain. So building elevations, setbacks from dikes and watercourses, and also other construction specifications. So there's 4 main things that the floodplain bylaw does. The first thing is it designates floodplains, which then gives the district the ability to regulate development within those floodplains. It establishes flood construction levels and setbacks from watercourses and dikes in order to keep new development safe. It establishes floodplain specifications, things like erosion and scour protection for building foundations. And it establishes exemptions, which there are 3 types. There's general exemptions that apply. Applicants don't need to apply for that. It just applies all the time. There's the local area exemption for non-residential development in the downtown core. And then there are site-specific exemptions, which applicants can apply for in cases of hardship. So there are 2 main changes with this amendment. The first is to consider allowing parkades below the groundwater table, subject to receipt of an acceptable groundwater management plan. The second is to clarify regulations for the addition of secondary suites in existing homes that have floor space below the flood construction level. And then there are some minor housekeeping items. With respect to the parkades below the groundwater table, this is currently prohibited in the existing bylaw due to previous staff concerns about the impacts of dewatering for having parkades below the groundwater table. Through discussion with the planning department, we understand that parking is a significant limiter of density in some areas that are quite desirable for community development and some areas that have been designated as for future sub-area plans in our official community plan. And staff also believe that previous concerns that we had for putting parkades below the groundwater table can be addressed through appropriate conditions and through a groundwater management plan. The most important of those conditions is that no dewatering be allowed and that no water can be discharged into our drainage system or into water courses. So basically parkades would be tanked and they would be rest below the groundwater table, but there would be no ongoing dewatering. And this follows the approach that has been adopted in the city of Burnaby and Vancouver, among other areas. The second main change is to allow currently the bylaw allows for conversion of floor space below the flood construction level into secondary suites, subject to a number of conditions, the most important of which is safety certification by a qualified professional. The district has received a number of applications for secondary suites in areas of very high hazard, so areas where the flood level would be higher than the ceiling in the secondary suite. And staff have taken issue with that and have not granted exemptions. So this proposed amendment will add some additional clarity around the conditions or the acceptable locations where a suite could be added. And that is generally, it's explicitly where the flood depth is less than 1 meter. And this is where it would be considered more of a nuisance flooding rather than a risk to life. And this map generally shows the areas that would be acceptable. So those areas in green are areas that would generally be acceptable to add a secondary suite on the ground floor of the building. So Hospital Hill, Valley Cliff, Loggers East, and portions of the Garibaldi Estates, as well as Garibaldi Highlands and some Tantalus Road area. Generally areas in Brackendale, downtown, North Yards, and western areas in Garibaldi Estates would, where the flood depths are greater, would not be considered appropriate to retrofit an existing building and add a secondary suite at grade. And with that, I will hand it back to the chair for any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Any questions? Anderson?
Mr. Olson, do we not have an example? At least it is rare around town, but on Pemberton Avenue, the development that's going in at the former Diamond Head Medical Clinic site is an underground parking. Was that done with certain provisions in the existing bylaws, or perhaps I'm off track here and it's not relevant to the case in front of us, but do we have any ongoing projects where that is some demonstration of where we might go with this revision, the amendments you're speaking to?
Through the mayor, I'm not familiar with that particular development or the conditions that allowed for a parkade below the groundwater table in that case. There are site-specific exemptions, as I previously mentioned. So if a parkade was allowed below the groundwater table, they may have received a site-specific exemption. It's also possible that while it is a below ground parkade, that it may not actually be below the seasonal high groundwater table. It is common that qualified professionals go and measure the groundwater table elevation prior to putting in a parkade, and applicants have had to demonstrate to the district that it is not going below the groundwater table to date. So, but I'm not specifically familiar with that example.
Thank you. The scenarios you outlined is probably applying in that case. Thank you.
Mr. Buxton, you appeared. Did you want to speak to that?
I can't really add much more than Mr. Ralston added. It's partially below grade or mostly below grade, but above the static water table.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I guess my concern is also around the first kind of scope change in the proposed bylaw with putting underground parking below the groundwater or below the groundwater table. Specifically, the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan says that it does not address urban stormwater flooding and groundwater flooding as part of its initial scope. And so I'm just curious, I'm not an expert in this field, but if we extend into this area, are we potentially treading on into a different area that is actually not fully considered under the existing integrated flood?
So the floodplain bylaw would look at this from a flood perspective, primarily with respect to overland flooding, but all new developments are also required to prepare stormwater management plans and drainage plans. And so they would need to ensure that drainage capacity and safety from a drainage perspective is addressed as well. So that would be addressed, but not necessarily through the floodplain bylaw, more from regulations that are in our subdivision and development control bylaw.
So would those regulations in the subdivision and control bylaw also address the groundwater flooding component and not just the stormwater flooding?
The groundwater, through the chair, the groundwater, placing a parquet below the groundwater table is regulated through the floodplain bylaw. And as part of receiving a groundwater management plan, this is one of the conditions that would be that we require in order to allow a parquet to go below the groundwater table. They would need to address groundwater flooding as part of that to ensure that there is no flooding issues, that the structure is safe with respect to groundwater, and also some of the other conditions that we've established, like that there can be no ongoing dewatering or discharge of stormwater into our drainage system and water courses.
And then just on that point, I know that there was extensive engagement on the Integrated Flood Hazard Management Plan as a whole. Is there any proposed engagement on what the components of that groundwater management plan would entail, or do we make the terms of reference of those plans public?
Through the chair, staff are in the process of drafting terms of reference for groundwater management plans currently. It is largely duplicating and building upon and sort of localizing some of the conditions and policy that has been established in the city of Burnaby and city of Vancouver. That will ultimately be made public on the district's website.
Okay, any other questions? So just for clarity, Mr. Ralston, public, anyone that's in the floodplain currently can't build a secondary suite below the FCL.
Currently, there are provisions for allowing secondary suites below the FCL, subject to a number of conditions that have been established. And what we're doing is simply adding an additional condition to clarify areas that the district considers it appropriate and where we would be where we would allow those secondary suite additions. Currently, it is less regulated, and we're adding some clarity to those regulations.
Okay, thank you. So the staff recommendation is to give the floodplain management bylaw number 2751. So this is a new number for the bylaw.
That's correct.
That it be given first two readings. Moving that, Councillor Hurt. Thank you. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor French. Any comments? Councillor Hurt and then Councillor French.
Thank you. We live in a challenging area for development, and I think it's important to have the most current and defined regulations to guide development in that area. So, and this is exactly that. So I'm happy to support this, and thank you for all the hard work, Mr. Ralston.
Yeah.
Councillor French.
The improvement. Thanks, Mayor. The improvements that are being made to this bylaw are important, and I'm happy to support the evolution of the floodplain management bylaw. And again, I acknowledge the good work of staff on this particular file. I support the recommendation in front of us.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I will support the motion on the floor. I do contend that this is always going to be a bit of an iterative process with the floodplain management bylaw as we kind of learn as we go and figure out what's working and what's not. I do have some reservations around the underground parking and receiving a groundwater management plan, just in terms of potential shift in scope there relative to the integrated flood hazard management plan. But I am appreciate the feedback that or the clarifications that Mr. Rolston has provided this evening. And yeah, so hopefully we'll potentially hear back from any community members who are experts in this field before adoption if there are any concerns on that. Thanks.
Councilor Panga?
Thanks. I will be supporting this for now, but I will note the restriction on density in relation to parking is because our requirement for parking and not parking in and of itself. And knowing that we need to get away from vehicle dependence, we are trying to build public transit networks and build a community that doesn't depend on cars. I am struck by, you know, maybe the better solution is to put lower requirements on parking, and then that frees up developer money for affordable housing and other things. And I think that might be better use of some of the resources rather than sort of requiring all the studies and this below grade parking so that they can get the density they want. And so that's the one hesitation I have around this at the moment. But for now, I will support this. Thank you.
Any further comments? I'll call the question. Any opposed? It carries. Thank you, Mr. Ralston.
Thank you.
We'll now hear from the two people that wanted to speak as part of unscheduled public attendance. The first is Lee O'Callahan. Lee, will unmute you, and then you will have 5 minutes to address council.
Hi there. The 498 signatures on the petition shows how concerned Ballycliffe is about this bylaw. Firstly, I'd like to make it clear that people who signed this petition are not anti-homeless. They are concerned about a bylaw getting rushed through that will have a massive impact on our community. Here's what the petition says. What's the petition for? To stop Bylaw 2829/2021. What's the reason for the petition? There has been no discussion with Ballycliffe residents, nor were we given any information about this bylaw change, which will have a massive impact on our community. The summary: to stop the camping bylaw changes for homeless sheltering in Ballycliffe. It's important to note the words here. See how it says changes for homeless sheltering? See how it doesn't say to stop homeless sheltering? I just want to make that clear. Okay, moving on. I'll start with the blue zone and what it will mean for Ballycliffe. We are being told the intention of the blue zone is to clearly state where there is no camping and to clearly identify where homeless can shelter. I appreciate the intention of the blue zone, but it will have the exact opposite effect of what you are trying to do. If this bylaw is adopted today, media will write about it, then tomorrow when someone Googles Squamish camping, the map with the blue zone will come up. The red zone is pretty clear. No camping, no homeless sheltering. The blue zone, not so clear. To someone on Google, it will look like the blue zone is the only area in Squamish where homeless sheltering is allowed. Once again, I understand the intention is to help keep illegal campers out of the blue zone, but they will take advantage of this, and so will people without fixed addresses from outside of Squamish. So this brings us back to the question, why do we need the blue zone? The district is saying the blue zone will allow them to increase enforcement and education. Okay, this part sounds good, but why do we need a bylaw to increase enforcement and education? The answer is we don't. We do not need to have a bylaw with a map showing a blue zone to increase enforcement or to increase education. So if we don't need the blue zone to increase enforcement and we don't need the blue zone to increase education, and the chances are the map of the blue zone will only draw illegal campers to it, why have it? Maybe you're thinking the bylaw and map is easy to understand. I don't think it is. Can we at least admit how much confusion there was at the May 4th council meeting? Remember Jenna Stoner asking questions and being given incorrect answers? Remember the new bylaw didn't include parks north of the Manquam? Remember having to stop in the middle of passing the third reading to correct an error? If council and the planner did not have a firm grasp of the blue zone by the end of the third reading, I think it's safe to say any regular person would not understand it. Let's move to the next point. The wording for the area of the blue zone is even more alarming. We know the most recent version of the bylaw now includes homeless can shelter in parks north of the Mamquam. Well, what about the blue zone? Homeless can shelter in all parks and on public land in the blue area. Let me say that again because I haven't heard it discussed. North of the Mamquam, homeless can shelter in parks. In the blue zone, homeless can shelter in all parks and on public land. This means all the orange areas on Schedule A covered by the blue zone will be affected. Is anyone aware of this? I have not heard it discussed once. This is so unfair for Valleycliff, and I'll go as far as to say the bylaw is being used to funnel illegal campers who say they are homeless into our neighborhood. Let's move to the next point. As for the other sections of the bylaw, I understand and appreciate the district is trying to get ahead of the Supreme Court ruling allowing homeless to shelter. But let's compare Vancouver's new bylaw to the bylaw Squamish is proposing. We'll go through a couple examples. What's Vancouver's definition of homeless? The state of having no access to permanent or temporary housing, accommodation, or shelter. What's Squamish's definition of homeless? Has neither a fixed address nor predictable residence to return to on a daily basis. Do you notice the difference? If shelter space is available in Vancouver, they can direct homeless out of the park, whereas in Squamish, we will have no authority to do so. Vancouver does not allow shelters in natural areas, whereas Squamish clearly shows homeless sheltering is allowed in the protected ecological reserve by Valley Drive.
You have 30
Vancouver,
seconds, please.
Pardon?
30 seconds.
Oh. Vancouver does not allow campfires, lighted candles, propane lanterns, or stove, or other similar devices, where Squamish does not even bring this up. The next two are pretty important for parents out there. Vancouver requires shelters to be a minimum of 25 meters away from playgrounds, whereas Squamish has chosen 20 meters. Vancouver requires shelters to be dismantled and moved by 8 a.m., where Squamish has chosen 9 a.m. See how Vancouver requires shelters to be removed before kids walk to elementary school, where Squamish is 9 a.m.? I ask you, why does Squamish need to be more progressive than Vancouver? Vancouver is one of the most progressive cities in the world. I hope this is enough for council to stop the adoption of the bylaw, and I'm asking you to fully remove the blue zone as it makes no sense. As for the Supreme Court ruling, it was established back in 2015. You do not need to ram this bylaw through before May long weekend. Please open this bylaw up for public input and do not put a flag on Valleycliff as the place to illegally camp by saying you are homeless. Thank you for your time.
Next up, we had Kim and Graham. I'm sorry, Kim and Graham, I can't remember your last name. I've been writing it down.
That's fine. It's Kim McGrenery here. So good evening, Mayor and Council, and thank you for allowing me the time to speak this evening. I strongly urge the Council to postpone the adoption of the District of Squamish Camping Bylaw number 2829/2001 as well this evening, as it pertains to camping in a vehicle. As a current homeowner and previous van dweller, the repercussions of this bylaw are very close to my heart. Squamish has a rich culture made up of its collection of residents and visitors who love this town. I strongly believe that choosing traditional housing should not be a requirement for being a Squamish local. There are many people in this community who work for local businesses, own local businesses, or rent local workspace while simultaneously choosing a non-traditional vehicle dwelling to live in. Vehicle dwellers are valued members of our community, and their worth should in no way be tied to their choice of home. The current bylaw discriminates against those who choose to live in vehicles, and it also does not protect vulnerable homeless living in vehicles. People live in vehicles for multiple other reasons as well, including escaping domestic violence, not being able to find traditional housing, the current unaffordable housing crisis, or just being between places. Forcing members of our community to live in traditional housing adds financial burdens for those who may already be struggling, and it further increases income disparity by accentuating the gap between affluence and poverty. It also adds unnecessary stigma to those who are already vulnerable. There are many collaborative solutions that could be adopted as amendments to this bylaw, including the implementation of a permit system for locals. A permit system would enable vehicle residents to be recognized. It could allow for a fee or tax to be collected, and it could build rapport between the district, bylaw officers, and vehicle residents. Regardless of the final solution, a long-term policy that supports year-round vehicle residents is needed, coupled with another public hearing and consultation. I truly believe that inclusivity is a key identity of Squamish and something that our town can be really, really proud of. I really hope that you make a choice to support the whole community and do not rush to adopt this bylaw prematurely. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so council, we're moving on to item D, adoption. District of Squamish Camping Bylaw number 2829/2021. Given the feedback we've received from the public, and not just tonight, but since first three readings and the discussion at council, I did ask staff to take this into consideration and potentially come forward with amendments if they felt that based on the feedback we've heard from the community that they could make this bylaw more clear for the public and for council. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Pagely, and we'll go from there.
Good evening, Mayor Aylett, members of council and members of the community viewing this evening. My name is Dan Pagely. I'm the acting general manager of community services. In response to the feedback that we have carefully heard and reviewed over the last few weeks, staff are making a recommendation in the context of this being a visitor and camping management plan. It has always been meant to be a two-prong approach. The focus being enforcement on seasonal visitation and historical areas of complaints, and to align our bylaws with the BC Supreme Court ruling to provide homeless the ability to shelter temporarily overnight on public lands with clear criteria to safeguard against the unintended outcomes such as long-term camps that have been referenced in our letters and also this evening. Therefore, staff are recommending that council rescind third reading of the District of Squamish the Squamish Camping Bylaw number 2829/2021, given May 4th readings, and that council give the District of Squamish a Squamish Camping Bylaw number 2829/2021 amended third reading as follows. By deleting section 3.1 and replacing it with a new section 3.1, which would read, this bylaw applies to any public place within the territorial jurisdiction of the district. This basically removes the blue area. We will no longer refer to the blue area, and we'll just speak to the red area in the schedule that's currently being proposed. So we'll remove the blue area, and that the bylaw would apply to all public places within the territorial jurisdiction of the district. We also recommend, by adding a new section 3.3, any activity on the Crown land which has been expressly authorized by a permit, lease, or agreement with the government of British Columbia and which is being carried on the lands developed to be used as a campground. We also are recommending, by amending Schedule A, to remove the blue area and also extend the red area to include all of the Smoke Bluff Park. Through the chair, if I may take a moment to speak to these proposed language.
Please go ahead.
Next slide, please. We appreciate there has been a lot of discussion back and forth on either side of the issues, and we understand this is complex and it's involving a number of layers of our community. The focus, I want to remind us all, is about the visitor and camping management plan. And we're doing this to support the growth of the traffic that's about to enter the corridor with a number of visitors, to ensure that we can all work harmoniously together with the residents, the neighborhoods, the businesses, and the visitors, so we all can protect the recreational opportunities that avail ourselves of the built and natural environments in the corridor. Will people be permitted to camp in our parks? Absolutely no. The camping bylaw is very clear. Camping in our parks, public spaces is not allowed. There's a clear distinction between the right to shelter versus camping, which is clearly outlined in our bylaws, and so that tool is in place. Are we inviting long-term homeless camps? Absolutely not. Without this tool, we'd be setting up the community for that potential. We've learned from other communities that if you enter into these situations without aligning your bylaws with precedents and other situations that have been considered through the courts, that we are open to such things as long-term camps. So these tools are put in place to ensure we don't have that, and we're trying to be proactive. Why is the district doing this now? Do we need this? And yes, we do, to provide enforcement tools for seasonal visitor management and focus on the areas that have traditionally had historical complaints. And we do track those, and so we do know what those areas are, and we will apply strategies particular to those, and those will be discussed later on when we talk about our enforcement policy. Next slide, please. Also, the district is working with multiple agencies to manage visitor growth and overnight sheltering. This is not just something that the District of Squamish is working alone. We are working with BC Parks, Glenrod, SORCA, the Access Society, Tourism Squamish, and other agencies that are also impacted with the growth. And we want to have that balance between being welcoming and also ensuring that we have appropriate guest behavior and also resident activities that are appropriate. We also continue to work with the province and social agencies to create solutions that safely house those in need. For example, under one roof, we have 40 units, and Buckley Avenue Affordable Rental Project is projected at 76 units. These are two examples. And we continue to work hard to secure more additional units. So in conclusion, the proposed bylaw amendments are and supporting strategies. For example, we are looking at strategically porta potties for local residents and certain trailheads and visitors. Enhanced enforcement. Enforcement will occur after hours, weekends, and on stat holidays. We're working closely with other agencies in and outside of the district. And we're also being introduced to manage the growth and visitor traffic while supporting the quality of life for the overall community. That concludes our presentation and our proposed amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paisley. So council, staff are rescinding third reading and giving new third reading with the amendments as proposed. This evening, are there any questions about the proposed amendment? Councilor Riggs.
Thank you. Just as a matter of process, if that passed, would we intend to adopt tonight, or is that at a future date?
We cannot adopt tonight. It would have to be at a future date.
Thank you.
Councilor Herford.
Thank you. Do we have a copy of the proposed new mapping? I think I understand what's involved, but just generally, if I'm going to vote on a map, I'd love to see it. Is that a possibility?
Ms. Arthur?
We weren't able in this short of time to put the map together. It's basically the map that's on the existing bylaw with the addition of smoke. Not basically, it is. It is the existing map, the existing Schedule A with the addition of smoke.
And no blue area.
And no blue area. That's right. So existing can provide just a seven.
Thank you. And was this mapping referenced in any of the others, the other two bylaws that we considered recently? We gave third reading to? There's no other, the mapping only pertained to the camping bylaw is what I'm.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay.
It is mentioned
for that
in
clarification.
the enforcement complaint policy amendment, which we will have to get to after bylaw.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Councilor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, can staff just confirm if the proposed changes will then still refer to Schedule A? under part 3, 3.1 in the revised language? Or are we now presenting a bylaw that has a Schedule A that does not actually have a reference to it in the bylaw?
Ways will be in here. I just need to find out. So if you, on the existing bylaw, if you go to 4.1, A, 9, it says the area indicated in red in Schedule A of this bylaw. And that's where temporary overnight shelters can be erected.
Can't be erected.
Can't be erected. And also.
Any follow-up, Councilor Stoner? Any other questions? Councilor Stoner?
Could staff please put up the slides again with the proposed language? It's just difficult to understand what the changes will actually.
So, Mr. Paisley, the second bullet, that protects the MRAS campground, MRSA campground. Is that right?
That's correct.
And it doesn't preclude if we found another location for a low-cost campground, we could also, under this bylaw, establish that as long as there's an agreement that that's its use.
That's correct.
Thank you. I'm trying to give council enough time to digest and make sure that they don't have any questions. I've also been at the table, so I'm also happy to give people a 5-minute recess if that's what you want right now. Councilor Herford?
Thank you. I'm just scrolling back and forth here, and I maybe could use a minute, but while we have staff here, the red area is an exclusion zone. Which section in the bylaw speaks to that? I'm just scrolling through looking for it to make sure our definitions align with what we've just been discussing, and I'm assuming they do, but I'm wanting to double check.
Just read that out. It's, go ahead, Ms. Arthurs.
It's section 4.1A9.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, a process question. If we give an amended third reading to the camping bylaw, can we, and I think this goes to Councillor Herford's earlier question, if it's not referenced in the other two bylaws, can we go ahead and adopt the traffic bylaw and the park use bylaw?
I would ask that you not adopt the parks use bylaw because then we don't have a bylaw in place that manages people being in our parks. we'll be left with a bit of a gap for a few weeks, or a week, however long it is. The traffic bylaw, yes.
And the municipal ticket information bylaw and the notice enforcement bylaw and the fees and charges bylaw. Oh, sorry, that one's related to the other things. Sorry.
No, the MTIs include, and the bylaw notice includes, camping. Not just traffic, so.
So yes or no? Just want council to be clear on what they can give readings to and or adopt.
It would be better if everything gets adopted at the same time.
So you prefer we didn't adopt
That's right.
any of this?
Yes.
Okay. So the staff recommendation tonight then is just to look at an amended third reading of the camping bylaw and delay adoption until they can all come back together of the remaining bylaws.
Just another process question. Are we going to split rescinding and then amending as two separate motions?
Yes.
Yes, you have to vote to rescind and then you have to vote to approve an amended third.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Council, it's hard because you're not in the room and I can't feel your energy. So do you want a 5-minute recess or do you want to proceed? I can't hear you, Councillor Stone. I haven't learned the lip reading yet.
I was just testing you. I was saying I'm okay to proceed. That was helpful just to have that up on the screen for an extra few minutes.
All right, is there someone who wants to move rescinding third reading of this year's Squamish camping bylaw? It's moved by Councillor Herford and seconded by Councillor Gray. Any comments? I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Is there someone who wants to move that the district of Squamish give the Squamish camping bylaw number 2829/2021 amended third reading as laid out in the staff report and what appears on the screen now? You're moving that, Councillor Brash? Seconded by Councillor Anderson. Would you like to comment? Would you like to comment, Councillor Brash?
Yeah. Yes, please.
I'll go to
I
you,
would.
Councillor Anderson.
Sorry, I'm having troubles hearing. Is it me you'd like to hear from?
Yes, please.
Okay. We've had significant community feedback in the last couple of days on this issue, and that feedback has been extremely valuable, and it's brought the changes that we're seeing in front of us tonight. I think that the direction we look to be going is the best possible direction at this point on this issue. So I support the staff recommendation that's in front of us.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. The communication we've had with different stakeholder communities within Squamish has been most valuable. We've all learned. It'll be an ongoing dialogue. I trust that we've alleviated some concerns with this approach that's before us now. I wanted to just take a second to highlight the Smoke Bluffs Park, which is self-highlighted in this recommendation before us. Smoke Bluffs Park has generated a lot of discussion in the context of these matters. It also includes within its boundaries some private lands not owned by the district. And like any other private lands, it's the responsibility of the landowner to look after users and including campers. So just to clarify that Smoke Bluffs Park will be involving presumably just the district-owned parts of that park. But there will be responsibilities for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Pettengill and Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thanks. I will not be supporting this. There's been a lot of confusion. A part of it, I think, is because we've been sort of dealing with significant changes last minute. I understand there's been time pressures, but we won't see adoption before the May long weekend. And so that's part of it. I think we do need to slow down a little bit and at least have a couple days to review the complete bylaws before taking a vote. The other piece, I've been there has been some confusion, which tells me that we can do a better job of communication, but notwithstanding that, some of the discussion has been very troubling for me. And although the confusion may not have helped, I see a lot of finger pointing that the problems are visitors, and then the problems are homeless people, and conflating all homeless people with addicts, and a real from my perspective, exclusion of people who are struggling or a little bit different, and sort of blaming the other, which makes me very uncomfortable. And I think we've been wanting strong tools for visitor management, and I understand that, but I am concerned that we are reinforcing some of that perspective and that way of thinking. And even though it may challenge some of our enforcing, I would like to see something that really clearly articulates an inclusiveness and a welcomeness, and I think that might set an example for the community as well, that I think has been missing in some of the community dialogue. And so while I appreciate some of the concerns and why we are wanting to move forward quickly with this, I think it's the tools are a bit too strong, I think, for what we're trying to do, and in particular, not being allowed to be in a vehicle for more than 1 hour. And I realize that is in the traffic bylaw, but I see these and I understand these are a suite of all connected bylaws, and they don't tend to stand on their own. And that particular provision is quite concerning for me. I understand it may help us with enforcement, but I think it's going too far, and so I'm not prepared to support this at this point in time. Thank you.
Councilor Stoner?
Thank you, through the chair. I will support 3 readings of the new proposed direction of the camping bylaw. I appreciate the changes that have been made. I think that there was a lot of confusion. I had lots of questions last time this came forward, and I did not support it. And I think that these amendments do start to address some of those points of confusion in terms of what applies where. So I'm very happy to see the removal of the blue area. I think that will help clarify. I do think an important part of this bylaw is the tools that it gives us with respect to temporary shelter. So right now it is part of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms for anybody who is homeless, erect shelter in public lands. This is not necessarily trying to encourage that. This gives us the tools to ensure that those don't turn into encampments. And I think that that is an important piece of legislation that we, or not legislation, but an important enforcement tool that we need in our toolbox. I do hear some of Councillor Pettingill's concerns, but at this point, and along with the conversation we will have about the enforcement priority policy that is forthcoming, I feel a bit more comfortable moving this forward at 3 readings right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Herford, then Councillor Raves.
Thank you, and thank you to staff for bringing this forward. And I think the changes to this particular bylaw really help with clarity and ultimately with its effectiveness to the public. I'll save my comments on the park use and traffic control bylaw aspect when we deal with at whatever point we deal with those. So, but I will be supporting this as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raves.
Thank you. I will be supporting this as well, and I'd like to thank staff for bringing these amendments forward, because I do think that they clear up some confusion in the community and among council, I think. Based on the emails I've been getting, it appeared I think, to many people that we were creating more availability for camping in public areas or sheltering in public areas, when in fact the bylaw, I think, just went the opposite direction. The court decision has created, the Supreme Court decision that everybody refers to, has created the ability to shelter as opposed to camp in public places. And what this bylaw does is not create that, it just attempts to manage that and manage that in a safe way, in a humane way. And that would have to coexist, I think, with really the priority of this council has been actually not to settle on that, but rather to have people that don't have homes being able to be housed in buildings. Sheltering outside is one thing. It's marginal at certain times of the year. It's absolutely almost unpleasant and impossible at other times of the year. So this is really part of what our council has been doing and this government has been doing, is attempting to get people inside into a safe and dignified place where they can live. And so that we've been focusing most of our efforts on sheltering and staff have, shelters rather, and staff have highlighted some of those. So I think that's taken together, we have provided, I think, a safe and humane climate, I think, for people who actually don't have the benefit of homes, full-time homes. We do have a problem with camping, and we have to deal with that. It is seasonal, it is based on our attractions, and the one thing the COVID crisis has done is actually exacerbated that. And we do have to manage that, and this bylaw attempts to manage that as well. So I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Race. I'll be supporting third reading, even though I can't respond to all the emails I get. I do read them all. I may pass a motion to never use the color blue on a district map ever again. And I apologize to the community that, you know, through good intentions, we did create some confusion. And that's unfortunate, because I think that these bylaws are stronger. I think they give us tools we didn't have before. I would hope that the 400 plus people that took the time to sign Mr. O'Callaghan's petition take a few minutes tonight to send an email to Minister Eby, the Minister of Housing, and BC Housing, and talk about the importance of investing in housing, supportive housing in the district of Squamish, because that's what we're trying to do. And so you can say that you're not against homeless people, but I would hope your advocacy then goes in the direction of supporting our efforts to bring more housing to Squamish. Because I think it's been disappointing to see just how deep the stigma and how much people are marginalized for just the unlucky fact that they find themselves homeless in this community where it's getting harder and harder to attain that housing. So we're working hard to build housing at all levels of income. First and foremost, we don't need people temporarily sheltering in our parks. We need to put a roof over their head. And I would hope that the whole community can get behind that and spend some energy advocating to the province to make sure that that money and that funding flows in our direction to make that happen. You know, we have to try to do something to manage the influx of seasonal visitors to our community, and this is a start. And as Mr. Paisley said, we're working with so many other agencies and groups to monitor this. We are going to be adding evening and weekend bylaw. We are putting in more portable toilets. We're looking at opportunities to put in more garbage cans. And then we need to monitor this and see if it's having the positive impact that it's intended to have, to create more harmony between the people that live here and the people that are coming to visit. So, you know, I look forward to debriefing this summer with all of our partners and figuring out if there's ways to improve these bylaws in advance of the next high season. And I think, like several of the bylaws we talked to tonight, whether it was the oceanfront lands or the flood hazard bylaw, is that they do evolve over time based on what we learn and the opportunities we see. And so I still think that is very possible, but we do need to start learning by putting in some tools to manage what we see before us. So I'm happy to support the reading of the camping bylaw, and thank staff for listening to the community and finding ways to make these bylaws more clear and still give us the tools we need to manage these issues over the summer. Not seeing any further hands, I will call the question. Any opposed? Councilor Pettengill opposes. Motion carries. Thank you. So Council, we're going to defer readings on the traffic bylaw, the park use bylaw, the municipal ticket information bylaw, and the notice enforcement bylaw until such time as we can bring the camping bylaw forward for adoption. We'll do it as a suite. So that means we are now on item D6, which is District of Squamish Fees and Charges bylaw. This is amendment bylaw number 28, 27, 2021. May it be adopted. Moved by Councilor French, seconded by Councilor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. And then the District of Squamish Business License bylaw, amendment bylaw number 28, 26, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. District of Squamish Housing Agreement bylaw for 41665 to 41707 Government Road be adopted. Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by, I'll second that. Any comments? I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And the District of Squamish 2021 to 2025 5-year financial plan amendment bylaw number 2820 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Do you want a 5-minute break before we talk about the enforcement policy? Let's do that. So let's come back at 9:25. All right, everyone, welcome back. We are on to the bylaw enforcement complaint policy amendment. I'm going to turn over to Ms. Arthur. She's got a few slides.
Council, my name is Robin Arthurs. I'm the General Manager of Corporate Services, and I am here to talk about the visitor management enforcement policy that was introduced in the fall last week. So, as a reminder, this helps us to enforce the suite of bylaws that have been introduced for visitor management, and these are the seasonal, typically recreation-related visitor camping issues that we experience annually in Squamish. At the time that the bylaws were given first 3 readings originally on May 4th, Council asked staff to develop an enforcement policy framework which outlines the criteria for how our bylaw enforcement officers will act to enforce seasonal camping. So as way of background, in March 2016, the Office of the Ombudsperson published a bylaw enforcement best practices guide for local governments in response to the significant number of complaints that they were receiving from the public related basically to a lack of consistency and fairness with bylaw enforcement practices around the province. As part of this best practice, it was recommended that local governments adopt their own enforcement policies to guide how regulatory bylaw complaints are investigated and acted upon. This resulted in the district adopting a bylaw enforcement and complaint policy in July 2017. And this policy guides enforcement priorities and provides consistency and certainty when bylaw enforcement officers are responding to complaints and applying enforcement. The policy lays the foundation for response to complaint-driven enforcement action and officer self-generated enforcement action within the district's boundaries. So related to the enforcement policy, these are the general principles that apply for any complaint, no matter what kind it is, animal control, visitor management, noise. The district really has an enforcement philosophy that seeks voluntary bylaw compliance through education and conversation. And we give people a reasonable time frame to comply. Sometimes where health and safety or security of property occurs, there may be more direct enforcement approaches, but this isn't as common. It's actually pretty rare. We try to use conversations first. So the criteria for our visitor management enforcement policy are up on the screen. The principles within the overarching enforcement policy are carried through to the visitor management enforcement and will primarily be complaint-based. There will be opportunity for proactive enforcement, but that too will include conversations and education as the first line seeking compliance. As always, our officers take a common sense approach to seek compliance versus heavy-handed tactics. Priority responses when complaints are received see officers attending where there are health or safety violations, significant negative impacts on adjacent properties, general nuisance such as noise and garbage, or requests from other agencies such as the RCMP or landlord. And so this is the criteria. This is the section that will be added to the policy. And council has any, just I can stop sharing.
Thank you, Ms. Earthers. Are there any questions? Yes, Councilor Stoner.
Thank you through the chair, and thanks to staff for bringing this forward. I think it's a helpful tangential piece to the bylaws. I'm just curious if staff can speak to the definition of unsightliness that we use in the policy.
Unsightliness generally comes from, we have an unsightly premises bylaw, and unsightliness can have a subjectivity to it, but it's typically an accumulation of debris and garbage in an area. And what happens is generally somebody complains and says, you know, my neighbor's yard is overrun, or you know, if we were talking visitor management, it might be there's a recreational vehicle and they've been staying in the same spot night overnight with their hibachi or their lunches, and there's garbage piling up, becomes a bear attractant. And if our enforcement officers notice this, they will approach them, leave a note, and they come back when people are having a conversation about picking things up and directing them to where they can drop off debris and garbage.
So just to follow up to that, that seems like it would somewhat be redundant to element E in the policy, which is observation of accumulation of litter, debris, human waste. So is it necessary to include the unsightliness, just knowing that it results in amount of certain subjectivity when we have the issue of litter already spelled out?
The unsightliness might not just be litter though. It's sort of a belts and suspenders approach. It could be all their stuff in the parking stall next to them. It's just like clutter of things. So, like I said, it's a bit subjective as far as the officer just gives them the tools to determine the guideline, which guideline they're going to follow.
Thank you. And then one other question, just in terms of the way that these are numbered, recognizing that most of our enforcement is complaint-based. However, we are bringing this forward as part of the visitor and management campaign, or sorry, the visitor, it's late. What do we call this? The visitor and camping management bylaw components. And so I'm curious if the numbered priority in the criteria are in fact like the direction of enforcement, or if we do expect that with the additional bylaw capacity that we've added, that they will actually be proactively enforcing in the red zone, for example.
So I think that this, and I'm going to speak to Dan right now, this is going to be a little bit of trial and error in the beginning with our bylaw enforcement officers, because this is not going to be the only focus of what they're doing right now. This is added to their general plate of things that they're working on. And so, you know, they will continue to primarily be complaint-based, and that's how they operate right now. So they receive complaints about any variety of issues related to our regulatory bylaws, and this is just one more that's added on. So they will look at the list for the day of what they have to go and do, and then they will prioritize from there based on whatever criteria it is that they use right now, and work through the list. So proactive enforcement is they don't go driving around looking for things. If they notice something, especially if it's something that stands out to them, then that's when they will act. That's when they will act to get compliance. Actively driving around looking for visitors. They will get complaints just like we normally do, especially around the Squamish area and the downtown along Main, we will get those, and they will act once those complaints come in. Or if they're driving by and they notice something because they're going to say a dog call or a noise complaint, then they may come back and have a conversation with people. That's how it works right now. And previous summers, that's how it's worked. You good? Councilor Stoner? Okay, Councilor Pettingill?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. If I might, I would like to propose an alternative to the policy. I just emailed that to council. It's a little bit long. If I get a seconder, I will speak to it.
You can read it out loud so the public isn't on your email distribution list.
Okay. So it is, and this replaces the existing wording. Seasonal enforcement will primarily focus on problematic behavior and will use the following criteria for prioritization. Number one, behavior-based complaints and officer-initiated enforcement with A, observation of an accumulation of litter, debris, or human waste. B, consideration of impacts on neighborhoods. C, observation of recreational camping in parks contrary to municipal bylaws. D, observation of vehicles in a location at a time contrary to municipal bylaws. E, observation of visitors sleeping, staying in their vehicles contrary to municipal bylaws. F, observation of congregation. Number two, seek voluntary compliance considering no dangerous or unsafe situation exists. And three, nighttime patrols will focus on seasonal problem areas and complaint areas.
Would you like to explain why you're putting this forward?
Yeah, I feel, and I spoke to it when we voted on the bylaw. These are in the bylaw, it's incredibly powerful tools, and it is not clear from the bylaws that this is visitor focused. And I think with tools, our stated intent has been very clearly all along visitor management. And I feel then if we can't, and I understand why we can't put that in the bylaws, but then we need very strong policy language, I think, to inform how we direct and use those strong tools. And so I'm hoping this will balance some of the power that those tools in the bylaw provides and align what actually align the actual outcomes with what we're saying we want the outcomes to be.
Ms. Arthurs, doesn't the amendments that you have proposed this evening are specifically headed visitor and camping management? So there wasn't a motion on the floor, Council Penfield?
Sorry, yeah, I was hoping to, I was moving that and hoping for a seconder.
Is there a seconder? Councilor Stoner, you're seconding? Does anyone wish to comment? Pettengill?
Yeah, if I may, I mean, I largely took a lot of the language and some of the provisions. I just reordered them, but I did try and clarify a few things. Took out the reference to the blue area. It was bylaw singular in what we had, and now it says municipal bylaws because this is related now to a suite of bylaws. And so I try to, one, deal with consistency with the changes, the amendment we made, but also make very clear that this is first and foremost on visitor management. And, you know, I think it's important to recognize this is only a policy, so it does not preclude broader, more general enforcement of the bylaws. The bylaws are the bylaws and all that power is still there. This just sets councils and very clearly expresses council's intention with those bylaws we have given third reading to.
Councilor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I think I'm generally supportive of the direction that Councillor Pettingill is trying to go, but I also recognize that there are some changes here that are on the fly and would like staff's feedback on them. And in particular, I think the proposal that Councillor Pettingill put forward doesn't include complaint-based enforcement at all. And so given that we're not moving adoption of the other components, I would not necessarily be supportive of changing the language this evening, but perhaps referring this to staff to bring back with adoption of the bylaws.
Thank you. Councilor Race?
Thank you. I'm not going to support this, partly because I don't like the process of just putting them on the table like this without notice. We've dealt with that before, I think, among council. But also because when I look at it, I think there's some parts in there that are a little bit vague, and I preferred the previous version. So I would support the one that staff recommended, but not this one.
Any other comments? Councilor Hurd?
Thank you. I agree with the intent of this, and I'm interested to get staff's feedback on how some changes that are proposed may seem just to provide clearer direction on our part, but whether that's something that staff can go and implement. I really need to, I think, have that lens applied to it before I can fully support it. So as it stands now, I suppose I'd have to vote against it, but I am supportive of maybe staff taking this away and digesting it and bringing back a potentially modified recommendation with sort of this intent influencing that. Yeah, that's where I'd like to go. So I'm not too sure procedurally how to get us there, but I'll listen to the rest of the comments and see if we can figure it out together. Thank you.
Councilor French?
I'll be voting against. Thanks, Chair. I'll be voting against this motion. Taking out the phrase complaint-based is significant, and I would like to hear from staff just what the implications of that would be before we take a step like this. So I'm not in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm now going to support the motion on the floor. I prefer the times a bit too vague, and I'm not sure of the meaning. So I'd rather make sure we go with what was in front of us. I thought it was clear. Yeah.
Yeah, just like to clarify for my colleagues, point number 2 in what I proposed says behavior-based complaints and officer-initiated enforcement. So I combine those two into one line to try and give them more equal billing, but the complaints is still definitely in there. And the other piece, I think it is what is proposed currently, what I saw on the screen still refers to the blue area, which no longer exists. And so I think no matter what, the current one can't stand. I would be open to having staff take this away and seeing something next week that considers this. The reason I didn't send it beforehand is because we hadn't seen the amendment, and it may not have been relevant depending on what the amendment was. We have been with this whole series of bylaws having fairly significant amendments just come to us right during the meeting or right in the middle of the meeting, and so quite frankly, I don't think this is out of character with how this whole process has been, for better or for worse. And I sort of didn't have a choice because I didn't have time, didn't know what the amendment was going to be, and this is in relation specifically to the amendment. And so I had to know that passed and see staff's presentation before I could put this forward. But anyways.
I'm gonna call the question. Any opposed? Councilor French, Anderson, Race, Mayor Elliott, Councilor Stoner, Councilor McCollum's motion is defeated. I do want to ask staff, because we're still in question mode, about this reference to the colors in the map in this, and whether we need to fix that and then bring it all back again with the other bylaws.
So for the first sentence, if I could change it to say seasonal enforcement will primarily focus on areas of historical or current complaints and will use the following criteria.
So council, the option is to approve the amended complaint policy with that change in wording, or you can defer approval until we approve the other bylaws. Understood?
I'll move that this be brought back with the proposed changes during adoption of the other bylaws, so that we can review the language.
Seconded by Councilor Race. Any further comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, we are now at number 11, staff reports, cancellation of June regular business meetings to replace them with special business meetings. Current public health orders, moved by Councilor Stoner, seconded by me. Any opposed? It carries. 11B, financial services write-off of unflexible property taxes. Council, do you feel you need a presentation, or is this straightforward enough? Councilor Race? You're moving that? Seconded by Councilor Stoner. Any comments? Call the question. All those in favor, or sorry, any opposed? Motion carries. Motion to extend by Councilor Stoner, seconded by Councilor Herford. Any opposed? Carries. Item C, Community Planning and Infrastructure, District of Squamish zoning bylaw. This is amendment bylaw for the university definition and the pass strata lot. This is to set the public hearing. If you've been paying attention, there's a few of them on June 8th. That's because you said don't make July crazy. So we're trying to spread out the crazy. This is to set the public hearing for June 8th. That will be an electronic public hearing moved by Councilor Ray, seconded by Councilor Friend. Comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Carries. We received a memo from our sustainability coordinator who works on our transit file. Unless there's any questions, this is receipt to proceed. Fortunately. Councilor Stoner, are you moving that? Seconded by Councilor Herford. Any comments? Go ahead, Councilor Stoner.
I will just say thanks to staff for pursuing it. I know it was a bit of a long shot, and I will really look forward to filling that gap in 2022.
Thank you. Ditto. Thank you, staff. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Carries. Item D, community services. Item 1, paid on-call firefighter compensation. Is the chief still here to give a presentation? Thanks, Chief Stoner.
You're on mute, Chief Stoner.
Yeah, we can't hear you yet.
I made a witticism and I thought it fell dead, but I feel better now. Thank you. Chief Stoner, Squamish Fire. You can hear me now?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Here tonight to ask that council approve the following resolution, that the District of Squamish adopt the revised volunteer firefighter compensation policy, which increases the hours of compensation for weekly practice from 1 hour to 2 hours. So very quick background on this. As you know, we have an incredibly dedicated and hardworking group of paid on-call firefighters. We do see a lot of turnover in the ranks. Over a 5-year average, we see about 22% a year of turnover. So hypothetically, we see a new fire department every 4 to 5 years, which is obviously a challenge. And just for the record, it's not just a Squamish challenge. This is probably one of the biggest challenges that the fire service faces in Canada, but it is a challenge that we do face and we do want to address it. Problems that this high turnover creates for us is one, we've got a very heavy training schedule. Our career staff are training paid on-call members probably in the area of 48 to 50 weekends every year. And it's largely new members, trying to get them to a level where they're able to operate effectively on the fire ground. And just the numbers show almost when we get them there is when we're losing them. So that's a real challenge. And the other challenge that we have is experience deficit with our senior members or senior positions. So we're relying heavily on a few, which again could lead to some burnout. And that burnout could lead to some turnover. So we've got this self-fulfilling chain reaction that we're trying to stop. And so to stop this, we went to our members and asked them about roadblocks that may stop them from making a longer commitment, and remuneration was one of the main points. So tonight we're looking at addressing that in part by revising the volunteer firefighter compensation policy. Right now, very quickly, it states that for every day of training that a paid on-call member works, he or she will receive an hour's training. And so if they train for an 8-hour day, they'll get an hour of appreciation. If they train for their regularly scheduled Tuesday, Wednesday practice, they'll get an hour of appreciation or compensation as appreciation. What we are suggesting tonight is that on their regularly scheduled Tuesday and Wednesday practice, they get 2 hours as opposed to the 1. And then that's it. The budget implications for this, $47,000 a year. This year, because we're bringing it in mid-stride, is $23,500. This was approved as part of the 2021 budget process. So all we are asking for tonight is approval of the policy, which is attached, and the changes in the wording is highlighted for your ease of reference. That is really it, but I'd be happy to take any questions if you have some.
Thank you, Chief Stoner. Any questions? Councilor Pettingill?
Yes, thank you. My understanding is that we have already made, I thought, a compensation change within the last 5 years, but the turnover rate has been constant. So I'm just wondering if you can explain, am I correct in that understanding, and why we think this change will be sufficient to move that, or why we hope it'll be enough to move that turnover number?
So we had, in 2019, we went to our members, as I mentioned, and we did do a lot of feedback and then look for what would, hurdles to have them commit, make a bigger or a longer commitment. And remuneration was the top one, as I mentioned, but it was twofold challenge that they faced. One was the quantity of remuneration that we're helping to address tonight. The other one was how they were remunerated. Previously, all the earnings from all the firefighters were going to a pot, and it would be shared, and they'd work out amongst themselves how they'd spend that money, and that created some challenges within the department. And they voted to move away to our current policy, which is paid on call. If you earn money, it's sent directly to you. And data would show or suggest that it was actually very effective. So when I said it was a 22% a year, that was an average. In 2019, our turnover was somewhere in around with 27%. The year after we made that change, it dropped to 14, although it looks great. That year after was also 2020, our first pandemic in a while, and so it was really hard to say how much of that is based on it being a very unusual year and how much of that is based on the changes that we put into place. This year we're tracking for 17%, and again, we don't know where we wind up at the end of the year, but it does suggest that that change did in fact make an impact.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question? Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'm not seeing anyone, so the staff recommendation is that we revise the volunteer firefighter compensation policy, which increases the hours of compensation for weekly practice from 1 to 2. Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Councillor Stoner?
Just a significant word of thanks for everything that the fire department does. We're happy to see that number is trending in the right direction, even if it is a one-off year, that you are actually tracking that and making significant efforts in that direction is appreciated. So happy to support this motion.
Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, as I was thinking about this issue, I was remembering the training we did back in, was it 2 years ago now or a year ago? And, I think that was part of the purpose of the training, but it is such a tough job, a lot of risk, and the fact that people are willing to do this on call and put in all that training effort, our community owes a great deal of thanks and gratitude for that. And so I have no problem, despite my questions, I wanted to make sure this is effective and a sufficient tool, but I have no problem supporting this. So thank you.
And in the time warp that is COVID, that was only at Thanksgiving, Councillor Pettengill, that we did that. So not even a year. Yeah, Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I'll be supporting this, and I would like to recognize all the hard work that goes into our paid on call volunteer fire force, and the time away from family, not just for the training, but obviously for when they're called to action and doing their best to keep us all safe and themselves safe as they do. As our training showed us, end up in right there and in harm's way. So this is an important piece of work, and I hope that it helps with our retention, and that boils over into our public safety and the safety of our fire department. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Reyes.
Thank you. And I'm just going to echo the comments of my colleagues and pass on my thanks to the volunteers and the fire department for their commitment to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Chief Stoner, for staying up to join us. Thank you. Next
Thank
up,
you. It was fun.
Item D2, Seniors Hub Westwinds License Agreement. I would hope that staff can keep this snappy and on point as it is now almost 10 o'clock. Welcome, Gil, and
There.
Ms. Dicker's here too.
We have a very brief presentation. Oops. All right. So for those of you watching at home, my name is Nav Gill. I'm from Real Estate Services, and I'm joined by Sarah Dicker from Arts and Culture. So we're here to get council endorsement for a license agreement between the district and the Squamish Senior Citizens Home Society for a wellness hub at the new West Winds building. So just a reminder, this is the West Winds building in white here, and the 55 is in yellow here. This is a quick site plan. The blue is license area, yellow is the common areas. So last year, the MOU was presented to council and it was approved and executed in December. And some of the key terms of the license agreement, it's a 10-year term for approximately 6,000 square feet. We have a 30,000 a year lease license fee, and the district will be paying 100,000 in capital improvements over the first 5 years, as well as we have 2 options to renew for 5 years each. And I'll turn it over to Sarah now to speak on the engagement.
Thanks, Nav, and thanks, Council, for your time this evening. As part of Council's resolution that directed staff to enter into the Memorandum of Understanding with the Society, Council also directed staff to conduct public engagement relating to programming for seniors at the West Winds facility, as well as other municipal facilities. Council have endorsed an engagement plan proposed for the seniors engagement, and that was approved on April 6th. And staff are working and have recruited some members of the public to sit on a steering group, which will inform the engagement and direct the engagement. And staff will report back to council upon concluding that engagement. Just for the public's information, program at the West Winds facility will be aimed at 55 plus, so seniors in the community, and normal recreational activity will not be taking place at the West Winds. It's a facility for those people over the age of 55. But seniors programming will continue in other district facilities across Squamish. And then also any other budgetary items coming out of the engagement will be presented as part of the 2022 budget coming before council in fall of 2021. And then next slide, please, now. And then the resolution that we have in front of council today is that the District of Squamish approve the license agreement with the Squamish Senior Citizens Home Society for a seniors wellness hub at the West Winds building located at 38275 3rd Avenue, based on the terms and conditions outlined substantially in the form attached to the report from Corporate Services dated May 18th, 2021, and that the mayor and corporate officer be authorized to execute the license agreement significantly in the form attached. Thank you, council, and we'll welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from council? Not seeing any hands. Councilor Race?
Yes, thank you. Just to clear up some of the inquiries I got, and maybe other members of council as well, the engagement that's going on, and that is around programming. We're not talking about the sites. We have, I think, from my perspective, we basically committed to this site. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, we are conducting this engagement around recreation programming as directed by council in your previous motion. And that was a condition of moving forward with the LOO, and that engagement is solely focused on recreation programming and not surrounding anything else. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Stoner?
All right, that answers my question as well, but I'm happy to move the staff recommendation.
Just let me check. Were there any other questions? Okay, so that's moved by Councillor Stoner and seconded by Councillor Race. Any further comments? Councillor Stoner?
I will just briefly speak to it. I too also received some correspondence on this matter and largely around the timing relative to the engagement work. And I think being clear that the engagement work is around programming, we know that our recreation spaces and facilities are really tight across the district. And so this is a unique immediate opportunity where we can secure some additional space to help let our recreation programming grow a little bit over the short term. And I don't think we have the luxury of time here in terms of this license agreement. This building is being built, and so I think time is of the essence in terms of signing the agreement. So I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I think, I saw some emails that quoted the total 10-year cost of this, which when you look at that seems quite high. But when you break it down to the hourly cost of operations, and when you consider what it would cost us in terms of operations and capital costs and so on, managing bathrooms and all that kind of thing, which is included in this is a really quite affordable space. We know seniors population is growing. And so, I do not want to presume where programming is going to go coming out of the engagement. I am thinking, though, that there's going to need to be seniors programming at the 55 activity as well. And I think we just need to make sure we have enough space because Squamish is growing fast. And so I think that's why this is affordable. My understanding is, there's the rest of this project is important for seniors housing. And so working with our partners to make things like this work is also really important for our community. So I understand some of the concern, but I think this is really a win for everyone.
Not seeing any other hands. I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. We're on the consent agenda, so if there's any items people wish to pull from the consent agenda, now's the time to do it. And unfortunately, I'm pulling item 15. 15. Letter from Minister Osborne. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I wanted to pull letter 9.
All right. With those two items removed, can someone move the consent agenda? Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. We'll deal with those two items of correspondence after item 14. Action requested. One from TSAC to United States Sky visual quality objectives for council consideration. Councillor Pettingill?
Yeah, I had a brief chance to speak to Ms. Saxby. This was sent to us a little while ago, and since then, the province has extended the engagement through July. And so the province heard a lot of feedback that this is a really important issue and they need to do more engagement. And so, there will be an invitation to us as a municipality to engage in this, and I hope we will find a way to do so because it is critical for our forestry sector, also our tourism sector, and so I think this is an engagement piece that we need to be paying attention to.
Councillor Anderson?
Thank you. I'm happy to see this be forwarded to the staff, but I'd also like to point out that we have a draft, well, we can call it a final community forest management plan that is before the province that has a section on visual quality guidelines. And hopefully, as the province will be approving our management plan, we can make this public, and I think it's one that we can be very proud of, and not least on this section. There are high goals set for visual quality guidelines. And just for public information, visual quality guidelines is an effort that began in the Squamish area. Now, well, I don't know how many years, it's the late 1970s, and we are now at version 4 or 5 being applied. I think that as we proceed with our community forest management plan and its implementation, we can show the public and have the public be confident of where we're going and the high ambitions we're setting for visual quality guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe that we are going to be engaged by the province on this issue. So can we move receipt of this letter? Is that the intent? Councillor Fangio? Receipt, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have an email from MLO about the future of mountain bike park, that correspondence from MLO be referred to staff for response. By Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Erfurt. Any opposed? Motion carries. Another from S. Aryev about the daycare crisis in Squamish, be referred to staff. I'll move that. Seconded by Councillor French. I believe this person actually spoke at Mayor's drop-in, and but great to move this to Ms. McJanet for follow-up. Call the question. Any opposed? Carries. D. Stewart, drone use in Squamish, that this be referred to Wind State Services for a response. Moved by Councillor Anderson. Seconded by Councillor Race. Councillor Anderson.
This letter happens to be written by a co-founder of a new local organization representing drone users. And I think that should be very welcome, and we can hopefully look forward to a good ongoing dialogue between the drone user community here in Squamish and our airport operator, ourselves, and the aviation community. This is going to be very important. It's a growing field, and we're going to have lots of issues come forward, no doubt. So this will be a good dialogue that we're going to have with Mr. Stewart and his colleagues. Thank you.
Councillor Race.
Thank you. I spoke to Mr. Stewart, probably about 3 weeks ago now, on this topic. And one of his concerns, which is expressed in the letter, is that the signage that the district has put up around the airport isn't consistent with the Transport Canada guidelines. So I relayed that to staff and got a response from staff about a few days later with the consultant, or a bit of a paragraph really from the consultant that we employ on airport matters, saying no, it was incorrect, and in fact you could not use drones at this airport. But that's not consistent with the Transport Canada website. And so I went back to staff, referring staff to the website for clarification on that. And as at this moment, I haven't received a response to that yet. But it is, from my perspective, clearly inconsistent information. The website says one thing, that they are allowed, and the consultant says the other thing. So it's a matter of just clarifying that. And ultimately, I'm not sure that we have much control on it, but at the very least, we could make our signage consistent with whatever the Transport Canada regulations really are. So it can go to staff, and we'll all get a response, I guess, at that point.
Thank you. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Councillor Pengill, you pulled letter 9.
Yes, and I realize it's late and it's a bit of a sensitive topic, so I'm trying to tread carefully here. Appreciate the presentation from Ms. Peters. My understanding is that the legislation she was wanting us to advocate for has been sent back to the Senate by the Supreme Court because for a second time for putting sex workers at risk. And so I think responding to the specific ask is a bit of a challenge at the moment. But I do want to reiterate, we had a presentation that we were getting a review of some of our business permits and so on. So just wanted to sort of highlight this in that context to make sure we are thinking about the issues of exploitation and coercion in terms of our business permits, but also refer this to staff, in particular with mindset of the technical committees around wood fiber, LNG, and Fortis, and the work camps, because we know that is a significant source of those issues. And I just want to make sure that this topic is being addressed in those contexts. And the concern there in particular is not just while these camps are ongoing if they happen, but that they establish businesses which persist after the fact. So making sure we have, we're having a discussion and mitigating against some of those risks.
Thank you, Councilor Pike. Is there someone a second referral to staff? Seconded by Councilor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. I pulled letter 15. This is a letter that came as a surprise to many local governments that the Climate Action Review Incentive Program was expiring. So that wasn't done in consultation with local government, and it has helped to fund many, many climate action projects around the province. And there wasn't sort of a consistent piece of communication that followed about what's replacing it for, how we're going to meet the goals of the Clean BC plan, and if we're still required to keep measuring and be targeting carbon neutrality. So there's just a lot of outstanding questions. So I'd like to refer this to staff and ask them to bring back to committee of the whole a memo that outlines the impact to the district of Squamish and how it may impact our climate action plan. I feel like this is potentially an area for advocacy, or at least seeking clarity from Minister Osborne about what's coming. I'll move that. If there's a seconder, seconded by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have approval of minutes, recommendation from the committee of the whole, which I believe Councillor Bruce, you're in conflict.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I am a potential purchaser of a unit in that development proposal, and therefore I am in conflict and will recuse myself. And I'll just leave the meeting until termination. Good night, all.
Thanks, Councillor Rice. Now he actually has to leave the meeting. There he goes. All right. Does someone want to move that recommendation? Moved by Councillor Stoner, seconded by Councillor Trent. All those in favor? I'm sorry, any opposed? Ooh, it's getting late. Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? Seeing none. Anyone online for open question period? No, surprisingly. People have tuned out. Councillor staff announcements? Councillor Stoner.
Two quick ones. Tomorrow night from 7 to 9 p.m. there's an open house that the district is hosting on how walkable neighborhoods support community health. So if you haven't signed up for that, now's a good time to do so and join that conversation. And I also just want to highlight thanks to those who participated, both as attendees as well as panelists for the Lower Mainland Local Government Association conference that was last week. It was a really thought-provoking and content-heavy conference. Mayor Elliott spoke on a panel about leadership in climate change at the municipal level, which I think was really well received by the number of delegates that were there, as well as topics around sustainable tourism and what that looks like in the future, and the opioid crisis, and so a broad range of topics, but just wanted to highlight in particular the mayor speaking to the work that's happening here in the district, and that was a great panel, so thanks.
Might just add a shout out to our very own Maureen McKell at Amazon Root, who spoke on the panel around the opioid crisis and decriminalization. She was on a panel with the medical health officer from DCH, Patty Daly, our policy expert, Don, can't remember his last name, and the mayor of Vancouver,
McPherson,
talking about what it's like on the ground when we work at shelter and with people who are experiencing drug addiction. So she certainly added to that conversation. While I'm at it, I just want to thank all of our partners who attended the Mayor's Drop-In to support the conversation on childcare. It was very well attended. We still are need to work so hard towards solutions. But it was great to have the school district there and the Child Care Resource Center and folks from Sea to Sky Community Services and our planner, Sarah McJanet. It was, and Councillor French. So it was just great to have all of those minds there to help us really think through, are we covering all the angles that we can? So I want to just thank everyone for participating in that, and I will keep working towards those solutions with the provincial and federal governments. Anything else?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the LMLGA conference as well. And it was Councillor Stoner that moderated the opiate panel quite well. And you know, it was just a reminder, we've heard it before, but the deaths from the opiate crisis are far outnumbering those from COVID. And you know, it just really hit home about how much this is impacting BC. So it was an excellent panel. I also you know, Councillor Stoner is stepping down as second vice president or chair. Can't remember which one it is. And so I want to thank you for your service. And it is, you know, very noticeable. The Lower Mainland Local Government Association is, you know, Vancouver and Metro Vancouver and all the big cities in BC. And the Sea to Sky corridor through Mayor Elliott, Councillor Stoner, Mayor Crompton, always seems very disproportionately to our benefit represented at LMLGA. We have an incredibly strong voice, and so thank you to everyone that has stepped forward to do that. And I think that is one thing our community should be really proud of and thankful for. And so thanks for everyone that does that.
Thank you, Councillor Pettengill. Not seeing any other hands. Motion to terminate. By Councillor Herford, second by Councillor Stoner. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening, our staff that supported us and presented, and to all council. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.